Everyone, I will call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee to order. My name is Councilmember Alondra Cano, and I am chairing this committee. I am joined by Councilmembers Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Andrea Jenkins, Councilmember Philippe Cunningham, and Councilmember Lene Palmisano. We might be joined later by Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, who is currently handling some city business that might be tying him up a little bit today. So with that, we are a quorum of this committee, and we will begin conducting the business of our committee. So today on our agenda, we have 5 consent items, and those are the gift acceptance for the Minneapolis Police Department from Vibrant and Safe, which is a subsidiary of the Minneapolis Downtown Improvement District. We also have the amendment with SMG for plainclothes officers. Additionally, item number 3 is a grant from the Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education Training Reimbursement. Item number 4 is a grant from the International Association of Chiefs of Police for community collective healing and officer wellness. Item number 5 is a contract amendment with Translanguages LLC for translation and interpretation services. Are there any questions on those 5 items that we have on our consent agenda today? Seeing no questions, I will go ahead and move approval of these 5 items. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. And the items are moved forward for approval. Next, on our discussion, we have a few significant points here to go through and timely and relevant issues that are coming up here for our city. So before I start reading those, I do want to remind committee members that I'm going to use speaker management and would appreciate folks logging into that so that if there is a question that you want to ask, that we use this to manage our questions. However, I'm having a little bit of time logging in. Are you, okay. So that'll take a little bit of time to get going with the clerk managing this, but we'll make sure everyone can get on there. So the way we'll do this is we'll actually have each presenter come forward and do their presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then after the presenters are done, we can do questions. So please keep track of your questions throughout the presentations. And hopefully if there's some information that's shared already that provides clarification to your question, that can be clarified throughout the process. But you can also tweak your question and so forth and ask it at the end of the presentation. We just want to allow our presenters to go through their full list of items before us, and then we'll dig in. So the first one is a discussion item on a contract with Aspen Psychological Consulting LLC for psychological evaluation services. So with that, which is the staff member that will be presenting today on that item? Thank you. If you could just please introduce yourselves to the committee and begin your presentation, please.
Yes. Madam Chair Cano and members of the Public Safety Committee, my name is Destiny Shong, Human Resource Generalist assigned to the Police Department. I also have here Police Chief Madera Arredondo. Along here present is Bill Champa, Human Resource Manager, who is available to answer any questions after the presentation if I am not able to answer any. So in August of 2017, the Police Department put out a request for proposals in order to select qualified consultant firm for providing psychological services for pre-placement and fitness for duty assessment. The Minnesota Board of Peace Officer Standards and Training requires an evaluation, including an oral interview, shall be made by a licensed psychologist to determine that the applicant is free from any emotional or mental condition, which may adversely affect the performance of peace officer duties. At the same time, it is important to ensure that the Minneapolis police officers, recruits, cadets, and community service officers are mentally fit to withstand and perform all of the essential functions of the position in respect to psychological demands of a police officer. The MPD refers approximately 100 individuals to a pre-placement psychological evaluation on an annual basis. In respect to fitness for duty, the MPD and its employees know that the performance of law enforcement duties is inherently demanding and that such duties are sometimes performed under dangerous conditions and/or in a stressful environment. It is therefore important to the department for the safety of the public and its employees to ensure that all personnel in the service of the department are medically, psychologically, and emotionally fit for duty on an ongoing basis. The MPD refers approximately 1 to 5 officers to a fitness for duty psychological evaluation annually. The RFP process resulted in 5 providers submitting interest. When assessing the providers, we took into consideration and examined each provider's experience working with law enforcement agencies, their evaluation approach, their expertise in clinical assessment, as well as the assessment of normal personality of characteristics, skills, and abilities, their experience working with diverse groups of individuals, and how their scope of services aligns with the MPD's vision of building trust, accountability, and delivering professional service. The Chief of Police, Director of Risk Management and Claims, and subject matter experts reviewed all proposals and interviewed the healthcare providers. The Chief of Police made the determination with the support of the panel to select Aspen Psychological LLC. This decision was due to the following reasons, including but not limited to: Aspen offers two licensed psychologists whose combined experience and qualification consist of having a strong medical understanding of how physical conditions can also display as mental conditions based on their experience working at Hennepin County Medical Center. Both doctors have a demonstrated record of experience working with and understanding diverse populations, including but not limited to race, gender, age, abilities, military, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Both doctors have strong experience in clinical assessment, including but not limited to normal personality of characteristics, skills, and abilities. Both doctors have knowledge and experience of resilience and trauma and its impact on mental health, such as performing individual psychotherapy utilizing resilience, mindfulness, and the cognitive behavioral therapy model. They have also served as a trauma psychologist consultant liaison and have publications and have conducted presentations on cultural competency in psychology. In addition to their experience, Aspen also has the ability to administer testing in a large group setting, along with having a private space to conduct secure and private interviews. Aspen also offers their multi-evaluation tool approach. Aspen is informed and educated on the changing dynamics of police and community relations. In addition to that, they have a footprint in the city of Minneapolis. The costs and fees proposed by Aspen were within the allocated budget with an approximate $10,000 annual savings. Lastly, Aspen has a strong commitment to the MPD's vision and understanding of what types of character the chief is trying to garner to come on board. That being said, the department is confident in Aspen's ability to conduct psychological evaluations, which would result in the most highly qualified and mentally fit officers. The department is requesting an authorization of a contract with Aspen Psychological LLC for pre-placement and fitness for duty evaluation services in the amount of not to exceed $540,697.45. for the period of January 2018 to December 2021. Thank you. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the chief would like to say anything in regards to this particular contract before we go to questions. And we do have council member questions waiting in the queue.
Thank you, Chair Cano, committee members. Thank you for having me here today. As our communities continue to evolve, and certainly as our police departments, and certainly for me as chief, wanting to be very diligent, intentional in terms of culture change, one thing that police departments have unfortunately overlooked over time has been the health and wellness of its own officers. This was the first time that I certainly sat through each and every presentation that these vendors did. It's important for me. I have to be held accountable to the men and women of this department, as well as our elected officials, and certainly our community. I did not want to have myself in a position where I was at a community event and a community member asked me, what are the scopes and services of your psychological providers? What are some of the characteristics that they want to see and certainly that I want to see in men and women joining this police department. So it was very important for me to be alongside HR to sit through this process and to make sure that I did everything I could to try to get it right. So as I look at certainly changing culture, as I look at the health and wellness needs of our own men and women, and certainly I wanted a provider that also recognized the trauma that our community experiences as well. That was very important to me, and so moving forward, I think that has to continue to be something that does not get overlooked as public safety impacts so many of our people's lives here in the city. So that was my role in this selection process. So thank you, Chair Connell.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you to the city staff. Thank you to the clerk for putting up the speaker management, which is up. And so if council members want to ask questions, please feel free to join the meeting. I will make a note that Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison has joined us. And our first question will be from Councilmember Andrea Jenkins.
Good afternoon, Ms. Zhang. Thank you for that report, and Chief, thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned a lot of background that went into the decision-making process around, and I think you said this group is culturally competent. But I'm curious. Do they test, or is there a way to test for implicit biases that we all have as individuals in our society?
Thank you for the question. Through Chair Connell, Councilmember Jenkins. The tests that are being administered by Aspen consist of an MMPI as well as a California Profile Inventory test. In addition to a oral interview in which I believe the questions around implicit biases would be asked during those oral interview between the psychologist and the applicant.
Chair Connell, to Councilmember Jenkins, if I could just add to that. So one of the things that was important during these presentations were for them to certainly hear what my vision statement was, to hear the impact of procedural justice and making sure that ensuring that our men and women are giving our community members voice, treating each other with respect, building trust, and certainly being neutral in those interactions. We work in a very diverse and dynamic and ever-growing city. Culture is important. And these are the things that our men and women deal with. We wanted to also make sure that these vendors, when they gave their presentations, that they also knew from me that these were key traits that I wanted to make sure that these potential vendor had as well. So,
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. We'll go with Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Zong, there was a lot of news about this that came with great interest to members of my community. And from your opinion in evaluating this, does this specific selection rectify previous best practice deficiencies? And by that, I mean using more than one test, using a psychologist with a PhD versus a psychiatrist, as we've done in the past. Does this selection meet that criteria?
Thank you for your question. Through Chair Connell, Councilmember Palmisano, I believe that the approach that we are taking with Aspen is a different approach than what we have done in the past. It is an approach that we believe, I believe the chief will also agree with this, that will result, and believe to prior we were in compliance with a psychologist, but that it will result in higher quality and also provide us with, again, continue talent to do the work of a police officer. So does it rectify any deficiencies that we've had in the past? I don't think we were doing things that were not compliant, that we're elevating our continued expectations of our officers.
Thank you for that. And I do appreciate how you presented it in it, looking at a number of different kinds of aspects and the kind of background that this person has. In the RFP or in something that I read, my understanding is that the vendor or the person conducting these interviews would need to have experience with officers or with members of the public safety community must be trained in this and be familiar with current work around this topic, and would be board certified perhaps from like ABPP certified in this specialization. Is this vendor, does this vendor meet those qualifications?
Just going to. Apologies, give me a moment. I want to
Sure.
pull up her information here. Yes.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Palmisano, if she's looking for that. One of the things that was very important in this RFP too was that we were looking at combined experience as well as qualifications. In the past, sometimes I think that we have relied so much just on experience in a certain work set, but did not bring into account other experiences and qualifications. And so, again, wanting to get this as right as we can for both the health and wellness of our officers and the outlook for our community, that combined approach was very important for me. So, but I'll let.
Thank you for your question through Chair Cano, Councilmember Palmisano. Dr. Tyson Roberts, who is the primary doctor with Aspen, along with Dr. Adair Richmond, who is the other doctor. Dr. Tyson Roberts served as a quality improvement coordinator at the Center for Correctional Health Policy Studies at the Washington, D.C. jail. So there she was responsible for managing the quality improvement program in which all medical and mental health services were assessed for quality, accuracy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So in addition, with that experience that she have in the jail system, law enforcement system there, with her experience, combined experience in the medical setting, as Chief Arredondo has said, really proved to shine new ideas of thinking and evaluation in assessing police officers.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is from Councilmember Steve Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ms. Zhang, for this presentation. I've been reflecting a little bit. I was struck by a statement that the Minneapolis Federation President Bob Kroll made in response to an officer-involved shooting last year, where he indicated that he seemed to be indicating that there was some merit to recruiting officers who would behave aggressively in sort of defending the actions of an officer. And it occurs to me that there's not necessarily consensus about what a healthy psychological profile is for an officer. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to articulate what kind of guidance you've given to Aspen Psychological Consulting about what kinds of qualities we're screening for, what we think is a healthy psychological profile of someone serving in this role.
Chair Connell, Councilmember Fletcher. So one of the things that I can talk to that's based on fact is that the vast majority of the day-to-day interactions that our police officers have with the men and women of this community does not require force. That's a fact. So with that fact, we want, and certainly the leaders that are with me here today of the department, we want to make sure that our officers are engaged in things that are building trustworthy relationships, de-escalating situations that can be conflicting, listening, giving voice. This is, by the way, those types of skill sets through data have been shown to increase better cooperation between our community and our police departments. More victims are more willing to come forward when those relationships exist. And so those are facts. And that's what, as I conveyed to our providers or vendors through this process, those are the main characteristic traits that we want for the men and women joining this department. Clearly, there are going to be inherently with this job, there may be situations where force needs to be used. That's rare. And so we need those other skill sets, interpersonal communication skill sets, cultural awareness, these types of things. So that is certainly the message that I conveyed to the providers, and that is certainly the message that our leadership team is making sure that we convey to the folks out there who are interacting with our community. So,
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Our next question is from Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for this presentation today. I have to say that I'm really excited that we're having the conversation about officer wellness. As we know, the job is incredibly stressful and can be traumatic, and then that trauma and stress alter the way that we think. And so I know that this is for pre-placement and fitness to serve evaluation. So from what I'm understanding, a part of the onboarding process. But how does this fit into a bigger picture of ongoing psychological wellness for officers?
Chair Councilmember Cunningham. So absolutely, as we reset with culture and with our mission moving forward in terms of officer health and wellness, we know that, as you noted, this is just one piece of it. What we are doing is making sure that health and wellness is a part of all throughout our careers, from hire to retire. And so some of that will look like mindfulness training that is occurring over at the 5th Precinct. We are looking at our early intervention system, outreach efforts in that area. Peer support is very important. We have folks who are making sure that we're checking up on our officers. I will give an example. We're doing debriefings after certain incidents. The Minneapolis school gas explosion. While that would not be considered a critical incident in terms of officer-involved shooting or something of that nature, but we know that impacted, not only that community, impacted our officers who responded there. So we have debriefings. We want to continue to make sure that through the journey of our peace officers that health and wellness is so very important. And the community is asked that we continue to have that. In order for our officers to do their best, they have to be at their best. And so we are infusing that into all aspects again, from hire to retire, but this pre-placement psychology, that's just one piece of it. Yeah.
Are there currently any policies in place around accessing mental health services for officers? Like, are there any policies around health and wellness now?
Chair Councilmember Cunningham. So there is. We absolutely for example, our last contract, we included something about traumatic incidents. And so while we had been focused previously on critical incidents, we realized that there are scenes and situations that our officers can come across that will impact them just the same as if they had fired their weapon. And so we do have a process in place, and I will say that we are continuing to tweak that. We have ongoing conversations with both Ms. Zhang's team from HR, Laura Davis from Labor Relations, and we're really trying to make sure that we continue that focus and provide the resources and tools. We've even utilized the services of a trauma resiliency person from our community, Resma Menikin, to help with our supervisors to also provide them tools as well when their officers and employees come to them. So we're going to continue to utilize those services. So,
thank you, Chief.
Thank you for that. And we have Councilmember Palmisano with one more question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Zong, or Chief, will this testing be used to reevaluate officers after they've joined the force? It looks like in the RCA, it also adds roughly an estimate of 5 testings per year as a fitness for duty assessment. And can you explain the hows and whys as to when this pre-employment testing method would be used, or perhaps they would be using other assessments?
So thank you for your question, Chair Cano, Councilmember Palmisano. Yes, on an annual basis, the MPD refers about 1 of 5 individuals for fitness for duty, and that's throughout the career of an individual where they can be sent to the psychologist for that assessment. What triggers a fitness for duty examination is when the department believes or has reasonable cause to believe, based on specific observations and facts, that an employee may not be medically or psychologically fit or emotionally fit because they were involved in a significant or traumatic incident, not necessarily a critical incident. Another trigger for fitness for duty may include that an employee is returning back from a leave of absence of more than 6 months or has been outside of the department's observation for more than 6 months. And so that may require us to send an employee in for fitness for duty before they return back to full service. Also, if an employee is returning after a serious illness or injury or medical condition where the employee personal physician says they need to be seen, before returning back to active service. And then, of course, another incident where we may send an employee to fitness for duty is if they were involved in a critical incident. In addition to another reason why an employee would go see a doctor for fitness for duty is if they have informed us that they need to be seen, as they may think that they're not medically or psychologically fit. So those are the reasons why we would send someone for a fitness for duty. And again, it's about 1 of 5 individuals a year that fall into those categories.
Thank you for that. And as we're chatting here, it's just kind of striking me that I think it's important for us to also support a culture of acknowledging and welcoming folks to tap into these resources and to really leverage these kinds of systems of support, and not to be, shamed, for participating or engaging with some of these tools that the City Council is approving and moving forward with your leadership, and as well as your leadership, Ms. Zhang, because I think there might be some stigma associated with some of this work, and I think that we owe it to our officers and to our community to really help each other have these open conversations about these really complex topics, which sometimes are very conflict-based, that we're trying to all solve together. And so I hope that our inspectors here and our leadership can really help to encourage a culture of welcoming, engaging with these kinds of offerings and resources and tools. And then my other comment is actually more of a question. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the internal process that you hope to lead to assess how this partnership with the Aspen folks is going in terms of, we have a contract here that goes till 2021. How will we know if this is, the right partnership, if it's yielding the results we're looking for, if we need to tweak things, if we need to change the contract? I'm not saying I want to or that we will. I'm just trying to understand more about the internal timeline of how we will evaluate whether or not this kind of program and partner is who we want to continue with till 2021, or if there's points of feedback to the program and the partnership and the funding that can help us ensure that we're meeting the goals that we want to see.
Chair Cano, committee members, so I want to just address the last point you made because I think it's very important. So one of the things you talked about shaming. When many of us who came on several decades ago, when we would go to a scene that was, violent or horrific, and the next hour went to another one, the culture at that time was simply, supervisor may look at you and say, suck it up and go on to the next call. We're changing that. And part of that means even me as chief, naming it. It is trauma. We all deal with it, me included. But we have to offer tools and resources. The other key piece to this here that I didn't mention is that it's not just the officers, it's their family members, their loved ones, their circle of support that they go home to that are impacted by this. And these services, we offer services to those family. We oftentimes forget that the men and women who do this job, they have a circle of support, they have family. And so that is built into this as well. In terms of feedback, we know that, again, our work dynamic and demographics change, our communities change. Aspen Consulting will be giving us periodic feedbacks. The other thing, as much as I'd like to say I'm real versed in a licensed psychologist, I'm not. And so, but we know the community will ask them questions, and they have offered and afforded themselves to be out in community spaces to talk about their testing processes, to talk about some of those things, the skill sets and what have you that I'm looking for that they're going to be testing on. So they've made themselves available to community as well to educate and make aware. And then we will continue to look at whether that's through periodic reports. We'll continue to look at the type of caliber of character of individuals that we have coming on this department. I think it's also important to continue to get that community feedback as we continue to hire folks through this process. I think in a perfect world, when we get to a point where it's based on one's performance, whether that's positive or critical, as opposed to one's attitude, demeanor, and treatment. I think those are the things that I continue to look for as chief. So, but we will definitely be having documented periodic follow-ups, report backs, because we want to make sure we do it right. And we want to make sure we can tweak it in real time too if we need to. So.
let me check speaker management here, and it sounds like we're done with questions. Any other items? Okay, well, thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate taking your time to do this. And with no further questions, then I will move this contract for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And that item is moved forward. Our next item for discussion is number 7, which is the Minneapolis Police Department Enterprise and Leadership Introduction and preparations and updates regarding the Super Bowl that is coming up. And so, as you all know, this is our first time meeting as a new committee of the public safety. And so it was really important for us to be able to meet our chief of police face-to-face, our inspectors face-to-face. Oftentimes, our inspectors will be our right-hand source of support for responding to crime and safety issues in our ward. And so really being able to put a face behind the name is extremely important in such a large city. Very important topics happening in this area in our time. And so I really thank you, Chief, for engaging your leadership and bringing them forward today and giving us your time and expertise to talk about what your department does and how you're getting ready for the big Super Bowl, which my kids are, by the way, talking about. So, and they're only 7 and 6, so I'm like shocked. Please go ahead.
Chair, Cano, committee members, thank you again for allowing me the opportunity. If I could, if it's pleasing to the committee, if I could just have them come up
Yes.
through and introduce themselves and their precinct locations, and they're bashful, but if they wouldn't mind.
Good afternoon. I'm Inspector Kathy Waite, and I cover the 5th Precinct, which is everything south of downtown, west of 35W, over to the St. Louis Park, Edina border, and then all the way south down to Crosstown. So it's otherwise known as the Uptown area, but that's just a small portion of all that it covers. I've been on the job now for 25 years, and I've had the opportunity to work in all of the 5 police precincts and have had a chance to do a variety of things on the job, which has been really interesting and has really, I think, broadened my horizons on the job and provided me with some really unique experiences. Working in the 5th Precinct has been exciting. I've been there now for just over a year and a half. Prior to that, I was up in the 2nd Precinct, serving as their precinct inspector. So as far as challenges that we face, I would say just an increase in crime is that has picked up a bit. And with that, really the challenge that I see is property crimes. And the catalyst to really solving a lot of those crimes is to encourage community members to call 911, which leads to my next issue, which is community engagement. I really would like to see us forming stronger relationships and rebuilding broken and damaged relationships that have occurred in the past year. It's really important to me that we have officers that are able to go out to events and partake in non-enforcement related activities, getting a chance to know community members a lot better, and that non-enforcement capacity. Having a chance to sit down and have conversations with people, I think that provides those unique relationships that we'd be able to really build upon. We've got a lot of great relationships with the neighborhood associations and a lot of the neighbors that have been engaged over the years, but we'd like to expand that much further and developing those relationships with new community members and, quite frankly, a lot of the renters that come into the community. It is a high rent community, and so we have a lot of turnover. So making sure that we're getting out there often enough so that we can have those opportunities, it can be a challenge because of that influx of people. So we'll continue to work in that manner so we can spend more time with community. As far as some success stories, I would say just having an opportunity to get out there with open streets. We've had 2 very lengthy open streets events that took up a good chunk of the precinct, and they were very successful. Great weather, wonderful turnout, and lots of opportunity for that engagement. Another piece that has been a great success is the co-responder pilot project that we started up just September of this year. The pilot project is one in which we've got mental health providers actually paired with police officers. So they're actually partners. They're out on patrol in a car. It's not a regular squad car. It's an unmarked car, and the officers are in what we consider a soft uniform. So wearing a polo shirt, they still have a gun belt, but they distinguish themselves differently from a regular patrol officer in their uniform. The goal is to get out into the community and respond to emotionally disturbed person calls. So they're able to go out and actually do some engagement and spend time and assessments with community members that need that extra support. Being able to go out into the community and do this, I think, is unique for the officers. The mental health providers that are working with us are mental health providers, so they're used to going out into the community, but this is unique for them too because they're working hand in hand with the patrol officer. Another goal is really just to keep people in their homes. Not everybody needs to go to jail, not everybody needs to go to the hospital, but they need to stay in their homes. Providing that extra support immediately on site has been just of critical importance for so many community members. I could go on and on. So maybe I'll come back another day and expand on that if you have questions. But thank you so much for the chance to meet all of you. Thank you.
Quick introduction. Greetings, Chairman Cano, council members. I am Inspector Aaron Beard. I'm the 4th Precinct Inspector, which is North Minneapolis. It's the northwest part of the city. I grew up in Minneapolis, and this was my dream job. So I succeeded in my goals for my profession. I have 23 years on the department. I have worked in just about every part of the city. I've lived in just about every part of the city except downtown. When I started, there was no precinct downtown. I assumed command of the 4th Precinct in August. I have had a capacity on the department in various jobs since 2008 in North Minneapolis, from being the program director of the Police Activities League to being a member on the SWAT team to the training unit, a lieutenant in the 4th Precinct, and currently the commander. I won't go on and on, but I will say I do have a prepared 2018 summer initiative for the ward council members, 4th and 5th Ward, that I can give you today on things we can have a discussion on, some things that I would like to do moving forward in 2018. It has to do with not only crime fighting initiatives, but also some community policing initiatives. I think it'll elicit some interesting discussion, and we can have that at a later time. I do have a prepared report for you today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Cano and esteemed committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to be here in front of you with all of my peers. So I am the inspector for the 3rd Precinct. I'm the new inspector for the 3rd Precinct. I just left the downtown precinct for about 1.5 years and just came back to the 3rd Precinct, which I supervised for about 3 years. It's like coming back to home. I've worked with a couple of you, and I've been on the department for 27 years. I've worked throughout the city and done numerous jobs. I was just had a coffee meeting today with Councilmember Andrew Johnson to give him a briefing of what's going on in the 3rd Precinct, and I was able to share with him that I have the years of experience, the knowledge, to be able to look at our career and have a significant view with regard to officer wellness. And I am very excited with regard to this initiative and with regard to trauma training for our supervisors, so that we can have open discussions with our officers with regard to trauma. Challenges that I see the 3rd Precinct facing in 2018 would be property crimes, burglaries, particularly in the south end of the precinct, and violent crime along the East Lake Street corridor with regard to robberies. Obviously, we have crime strategies set up for those, including our beat officers and focused enforcement. Successes that I can talk about, particularly one, is along the East Lake Street corridor, again, with regard to the prostituted women along the East Lake Street corridor. Many complaints from the business community, residents, commuters in there, and along with not just the prostituted women, but the different public safety issues that arise from that. Our community response team focused on the enforcement piece on the Johns. So we really focus on the Johns, the purchasers. We made over 70 arrests of Johns with a 90% charge rate, which is almost unheard of. And we were also able to arrest 5 pimps or producers, which is a very, very difficult crime to prove and actually catch. And our community response team did that procedurally just-wise without any complaints from the community or any arrested persons or any use of force reports at all. So thank you very much again for this opportunity for me to brag about the 3rd precinct. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, esteemed members of the committee. I'm Ed Frisell. I am the inspector of the 1st Precinct. This is actually my 2nd tour down there. However, the 2 previous jobs have led to a lot of the success that we're currently experiencing in the downtown area. I was the dog watch or late night lieutenant for a few months down there, in which I can attest to the young officers that are down there. The average time on the job was 22 months. So I've had hands-on experience of watching what's coming out of the academy, what's been evaluated and trained, and watching them in action downtown. And like, I think they're calling me granddad now, but I'm very proud of the efforts that they've put forth in and around there. Prior to that, I was a supervisor or lieutenant in the domestic assault unit. I developed a passion for combating that very heinous crime. And we've been able to implement that in a lot of our strategies in regards to our beat officers. These type of domestic activities do not just take place behind closed doors. They take place openly on the street. They take place in the nightclubs. They take place in the restaurants. And the beat officers have been trained to recognize that. And we too have a very high conviction rate and actual charging rates of 5th-degree domestics, where officers that observe that type of behavior are mandated to make an arrest. And then we follow through. And with the help of the city attorney's office, we've been very successful at using that tool to not only take off some of those recidivists on the street as domestic abusers, but to also look at their criminal history. These individuals just aren't going home and committing these acts onto their significant others. They're committing the robberies. They're the ones that are stealing the cars. They're the ones that are selling the illicit narcotics on the street. So we get a 2-for-1 deal on many of them. And I've kind of made it a hobby to look at some of those domestic assault individuals that are getting as much as 60 months, thank goodness, okay? And looking at their records and then comparing that to the overall types of crime that we're experiencing in and around the downtown. Now, with that being said, one of my #1 priorities is to make sure the livability and vitality of not only the businesses, but of the newfound residents that have moved downtown in the last 5 years. Many different statistics show that upwards of 40,000 folks have moved downtown. We can see the towers here from the window. When downtown used to have tumbleweeds going down Hennepin, now there's folks at 5 a.m. walking their dogs and out running and working around. It is a true community. And the uniqueness of the 1st Precinct, which encompasses everything from Cedar Riverside to the North Loop to the very vibrant area of Loring Park, it's an outstanding opportunity for our officers to not only to interact with CEOs of businesses like Target, but to also now deal with block club captains that are living in these, shall we say, very expensive high-rises in and around the downtown area. But that all adds to the environment. Now, there's 2 very distinct downtowns. I often ask the question, how many have been downtown after 2 a.m.? You don't have to answer that. However, it is, it is very different. During the day when you have people working down here and going back and forth conducting business, and at night we have upwards of 20, 30,000 people centralized in the warehouse district, not only enjoying the city of Minneapolis, but enjoying everything it has to offer. But there's also individuals that come down there to prey on those individuals. And by having established beats that the businesses and the residences know those officers by name, hey, Officer Bob, Officer Mary, they're able to work in partnership, not only with the businesses, the residences, as well as a lot of the different livability folks that are right downtown. We have a homeless shelter that's smack in the backyard of the 1st Precinct. And we actively include livability specialists from those areas to come to our MSTAT or crime statistical meetings once a week to make sure that we too are not just arresting everybody, but offering the various resources the city of Minneapolis offers, not only for their livability, but to help turn them around. And we've been very effective at that. And finally, as we prepare for Super Bowl, this is ground zero. We are getting all the resources we need at this point to make sure the safety is the utmost concern of the police department as well as the first precinct, and to provide the services for, it estimates, millions that are coming downtown to enjoy our great city when the Vikings win the Super Bowl. So, again, with that being said, I want to thank you very much, Madam Chair, and if I'm very accessible, so if you need anything in and around the downtown area, feel free to contact me directly. Thank you.
Chair Cano, committee members, unfortunately, Inspector Loining could not be here today, but he is 2nd Precinct, Northeast, Southeast Minneapolis, and also he's available to any one of our council members should they need any questions there. I'm also just joined by our Assistant Chief, Mike Jose, Deputy Chief Henry Halverson, and Deputy Chief Eric Forres. So, Chair Cano, you mentioned the Super Bowl. So, yes, Super Bowl 52 will soon be upon us. It is a 10-day festival which will bring in over 1 million plus guests and visitors to our city. There will be folks from representing over 130 countries here, over 5,000 media, over 10,000 volunteers for this activity. Super Bowl 52 for Minneapolis is considered a SEER 1 event. That's a special events assessment rating from the federal government. It's a level 1 event, which brings in a lot of federal resources. Those federal resources, accompanied with a federal coordinator, come at no cost to our city, but certainly in light of the magnitude of the event, Homeland Security challenges, that is what Minneapolis will have embarked upon. Super Bowl 52 has been 2 years in the planning, and we have had people literally on the ground in those previous Super Bowl sites, and then, of course, leading up to our big event as well. We will also have Governor Dayton, as well as our Mayor Fry, have signed off for the assistance of the National Guard's presence here. The National Guard presence is also because of staffing. The city of Houston, that has a 5,000-member police department, was able to manage that pretty adequately. Minneapolis, obviously, we don't have that large of a number of public safety officers, so the National Guard will play a role, particularly mainly static security posts at some of our major sites. But I want to stress, too, and the governor's executive order states it, too, that local law enforcement, Minneapolis Police is the lead law enforcement agency. We will be the primary ones responsible for any law enforcement action. So, but we will have a presence of National Guard. Also, too, it's important that as we have all of these resources, I've signed about 60 joint powers agreements from other police agencies across the state, from as far north as Ely, Minnesota, to as far south as Rochester. Very helpful for that. But again, Minneapolis Police will have the main footprint here in our city. This will not negatively impact our 911 response call throughout our city through these 10 days. It was very important that all of our leaders here, our inspectors, have adequate staffing, and so days off were canceled for this event a long time ago. So we certainly, as this is certainly an important event for the state and the country, I'm ultimately responsible for our 400,000 folks here in the city, so we wanted to ensure that 911 response would not be negatively impacted by this event. There's going to be, starting from January 26th to February 4th, that is our operational period. Downtown is going to get a lot smaller with all these visitors here. We have put out websites regarding SuperBowl.com transportation, because transportation, parking, all of these things are going to be impacted. We want to try to make it as less of an inconvenience as much as possible. And part of that will be just early communication to residents and business folks in downtown Minneapolis. All of I mentioned the 60 or so agencies that will be volunteering, helping us out for this. All of them participated in an orientation last week at the convention center. As part of that orientation, those officers who will be wearing different uniforms but still in our city they understand about the respect and the voice and making sure that we treat everyone, not just our guests and visitors, but our residents, with the respect that they deserve and that what we expect. Also, there was over 2,000 trifolds that was our volunteers created for these officers, so that when they are out there, they will have access to numbers to shelters, our homeless hotline. We are briefing during every roll call, day shift and night shift for our officers who are helping out in this, that when you come across someone who may be experiencing homeless, make sure they're safe, make sure they're warm. We have numbers there. Our MECC, our Minneapolis Emergency Communication Center, will also be standing by to make sure that there are resources available for our community members. We are working closely with our private sector in terms of the engagement and making sure that we try to continue to have as many eyes and ears, and making sure that this is a welcoming and friendly Super Bowl. It is truly, again, a Minnesota Super Bowl. And we could not, as a city enterprise, we could not even attempt to pull this off without the help of many of our city enterprise department heads here today. I want to thank Chief Friedel. I'm sure he'll be speaking shortly, but all of our city public works, regulatory services, city attorney's office. There's just a lot that will be taking place. I also want to say that First Amendment is absolutely something that we will be ensuring that members of our community practice their First Amendment rights and are able to do so peacefully and safely. And so we'll be ensuring that. I know we'll be working closely with our Civil Rights Department in the event community members have any complaints or issues as it relates to public safety during this time. And so I'll continue to be monitoring that and working with our department heads and civil rights as well for that. That is a snapshot. Chair.
Wonderful. We'll have a question from Councilmember Cunningham.
Yes, thank you. First, I just have to say thank you for all of the work and coordinating that's been going into this. I know that it's quite a massive event, so thank you. When we were first being briefed on it, the new council members were being briefed on everything, there had been some discussion around federal agencies being there as well. And so I just wanted to get some clarification from you about ICE being present, and what does that, like, what will they, how will we know what their behavior will be? What does that mean in terms of impact for residents who are navigating around downtown? So I just wanted to hear more about ICE's role during the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Chair Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for that question. So there will be federal assets, including ICE, that will be participating in some capacity with Super Bowl. However, our practices, our policies, our operations will not change. We are not going to be engaged in any sort of things that would have a footprint with ICE as it relates to questioning folks based upon suspicions that they're undocumented, or that is not anything that we will be doing. We are still, again, the lead local law enforcement agency, so our city ordinances, our law, I mean, we will be having that is in there. That has certainly been conveyed to ICE. Now, certainly, they're their own federal agency, but in terms of their work as it relates specific to anything related to undocumented community members, that is something that we will not be involved in. That is not the role of the 60 local law enforcement agencies that will be down here to help us. That will not be their role or scope either. And so, but if there are any, as I mentioned earlier about our Civil Rights Department, if we receive any complaints through that, we'll be trying to address those in real time.
So will there, I have a follow-up question, thank you. So will there be, do we expect them to be downtown and asking folks for any sort of documentation, or should we be prepared for a possible spike of raids? Like, I want to know kind of what their role, I understand that MPD isn't necessarily going to start enforcing what ICE does, but I'm just curious about the potential presence of ICE and how they may behave when they're here.
Chair to Councilmember Cunningham, my understanding is that their immediate role will be Super Bowl security related duties. If in the event that we hear that there's complaints from community members of, as you mentioned, raids or these types of things that are taking place within our city, I'd be having those conversations with Department of Homeland Security and certainly their representatives. But I have not heard that,
okay.
But we'll be monitoring. So.
Great, thank you so much.
Our next question is from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief Arredondo. You mentioned people practicing their First Amendment rights, and I've been thinking about this in relationship to all of the outside agencies coming in and the National Guard coming in. And it concerns me a little bit to think about our residents expressing themselves and then finding themselves in confrontations with the National Guard or with folks who are trained in some very different ways of interacting with the community than what we've become accustomed to in our city. And so can you speak a little more to what your plan is to make sure that when and if events are arising with members of our community speaking out and exercising their First Amendment rights, that that they're treated with dignity and not responded to more forcefully during the Super Bowl week than they would be normally?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Fletcher, to your question. So yes, as the operational plan was being put in place, we've had very good conversations and discussions with General Jensen, who is overseeing the National Guard footprint here. The expectation and protocol is that if there are any situations that should arise regarding local demonstrators or protesters, that would be a Minneapolis police response and not a National Guard response. And as a matter of fact, if that situation should occur, we would actually extract, National Guard would be removed from that area so that it would be Minneapolis Police that would be the sole agency to respond to that. So, and that messaging has been conveyed with General Jensen. He absolutely is on board with that and agrees with that. So, yeah.
Councilmember Ellison.
One of the things that I'm, just kind of starting to think about is the potential of, we've seen a spike also in sort of like, I guess, alt-right, sort of like white supremacist sort of protest, in Charlottesville. We saw an instance of vehicular murder committed, and yet those two protests were kind of equated in a lot of ways, but at least by the president. And so in what ways are you guys kind of dealing with the nuances of that and making sure that if immigration group or if a labor group or Black Lives Matter is like going to be doing a protest, that they're not then sort of equated it or sort of reduce what their actions are reduced to a potential white supremacist group that might also come and counter protest.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Ellison, and thank you for that question. Certainly very timely in light of Charlottesville and other recent activities around our country. We have plans in place in the event, and thank goodness we have not had to experience that in our city, but in the event counter-protesters, alt-right groups, particularly those who, through intelligence, have been known to come to these types of events with the purpose of creating violence and bringing weapons in, it would shift. It would shift dramatically in terms of our response. Our response up until this time in Minneapolis, we've utilized more of a softer approach. Bike cops and soft clothes in terms of uniformed officers and what have you. In the event of something such as that, the main focus and priority is to keep demonstrators safe, distance, and we would not, certainly as chief of police, I would be working with our elected officials, certainly Mayor Fry, but I believe a notification, a call out would be we would not allow certain types of materials, things that would be weapons in designated areas. We need to keep our everyone safe, and that includes even the counter protesters. But it would shift differently in the sense that we would want to make sure that there was distance. We'd want to make sure that our officers were properly now. Their uniform might obviously change because of the risk and liability of injury to them as well. But our main goal would be to keep those demonstrators safe. And certainly for me as chief of police is to do all I can to avoid that type of situation happening, but secondly, to make sure that I could do to minimize any types of individuals coming in here with the sole purpose of bringing in any sort of things that could be used as weapons to injure others and to incite violence. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cano. Thank you, Chief. The NFL itself has been under protests all year. Have we heard anything about potential demonstrations against the NFL?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Jenkins, the NFL absolutely has experienced some demonstrations throughout the season. I would not be surprised if that were to happen Super Bowl Sunday. We do expect some demonstrations, but we'll continue to keep monitoring it as we lead up to Super Bowl Sunday. I feel very, very good about the plans that we've had in place. Commander Gerlicher and his team has done a wonderful job in terms of the operational planning. But we will continue to make sure that we do that along the same lines as Councilmember Ellison's statements. Whatever demonstrations should arise, we need to ensure that they're done safely and peacefully for all those involved. So, but we'll continue to keep monitoring that as we get closer to game day.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To shift gears a little bit, I guess I've been trying to figure out a little bit about how to prepare for those of us who live in downtown East. What is this going to feel like? I think maybe on the spectrum from really fun party to military occupation, right? What should we be preparing people for in terms of, are we going to see people walking around in fatigues? Are we going to see gated checkpoints all over our neighborhood all of a sudden? I want to make sure we're communicating something accurate so people aren't taken by surprise and scared when security measures are coming into place. And I also obviously want to advocate for it to be more on the really fun party side as much as we can.
Chair Connell to Councilmember Fletcher. Will not be a military occupation. I just want to make that sure. But there is going to be a spectrum. Certainly, I think one of the most visible things, there is going to be a lot of people occupying this space that we call downtown. There's going to be just a ton of people as we get closer to the 10 days. And that even will have an impact on our homeless community, who's going to be, there's going to be 1 million plus people that is going to be occupying our city. Very candidly, parking that we have become known to use to, that is already very restrictive, it's going to be even more so. So I think what you're going to certainly see for residents of downtown Minneapolis is one, the volume of people is going to be very considerable. Your normal Monday or Tuesday night where the revelry tends to end at about 10 o'clock p.m., that will not be the case. There will be a lot of visitors, and there will certainly be more of a law enforcement, public safety presence. I would say that the 3 rural areas that will have the most concentration will certainly be in and around U.S. Bank Stadium. You're probably seeing some of the construction and barriers being put up now. Certainly the convention center's footprint will change dramatically. And as we get closer to the days of the festival, Nicollet Mall will certainly have an impact. That will certainly shift things perhaps over to Hennepin Avenue and First Avenue as well. But yeah, it's going to be pretty significant for those 10 days. We will have some dress rehearsals through those 10 days, and we are certainly going to be working with our inspector, certainly First Precinct Inspector, to see how many complaints he should get regarding traffic and with our traffic control agents out there. But there's going to be a lot of events. The Armory is going to be hosting many large-scale celebrity-type related events. Some of our different nightclubs downtown. So it's going to be a very festive atmosphere for a couple of weeks. So yeah, I wish I could say that you'll get your parking spaces as you normally would, but it's going to be very difficult during that time. Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. I think I'm less worried about parking spaces because we'll talk to TPW about that, and just probably more concerned about how many more guns are we going to see in our neighborhood than what we're used to.
Yeah, in Chair Connell, and to Councilmember Fletcher's point, so particularly as you mentioned too, the National Guard, they are not going to be. They have no patrol duties roaming Hennepin Avenue or First Avenue. That won't be. They're really going to be at very stationary, static posts in some of those main concentration areas. So yeah. And and during the orientation, we're really telling all of our law enforcement folks, regardless of what jurisdiction they're from, this is a very respectful, family-friendly environment, and to be approachable and safety first. So yeah, yes.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One last question that I have is who is responsible for protests that happen inside of the stadium? And how, and just kind of what will that process look like if there are protests within the stadium itself?
Councilmember Cano, Councilmember Cunningham. So there will be incident commanders assigned to various locations where these activities will take place. Certainly inside U.S. Bank Stadium, we will have an incident commander. And that incident commander, along with the numerous security presence with inside U.S. Bank Stadium, they would be responsible for handling any sort of a demonstration or protest inside U.S. Bank Stadium should that occur during the Super Bowl. Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you say that, who you said the can you say that one more time?
Absolutely.
I apologize.
Chair Cano to Councilmember Cunningham. If I can give you just a quick overview, we will have a multi-agency communication center set up, the MAC, that will oversee all of the types of, that everything will feed into the MAC in terms of resources, logistical needs, supplies, and so that MAC will be set up. But each site will have an incident commander. And so if something were to occur at US Bank Stadium, that incident commander would address that, but relay that back up to the MAC so that everyone centrally, we're operating under a national incident management system with a metro-wide unified command. That's all to say that this MAC, this multi-agency communications group, they'll all receive all that information, push down information, logistics, resources that's needed. But US Bank Stadium will have an incident commander with a robust team that would respond to any sort of incident like that, or any sort of protest or demonstration or what have you should occur.
So just for clarification, there won't be any private security that will be involved, like through the stadium?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Cunningham, there will be private security at US Bank Stadium. They employ private security throughout the year, but the law enforcement component team, they would have the primary responsibility for all that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief. One of the concerns that people have had is the fact that I believe the green line, or the blue line actually, will not be available for public use on Super Bowl Sunday. Can you speak to why that is, or is there anyone who can let us know what the rationale for that is?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Jenkins, I was just looking to see if anybody from Metro Transit was here, but my understanding is that through the NFL Host Committee and Metro Transit Police, as part of Homeland Security, as they, on Super Bowl Sunday, as they need to get ticketed passengers into the stadium, there's some security measures that have to take place, and part of that is making sure that those train lines are basically swept and clean in order for safety, and making sure that individuals on that train would not pose any threat to the general public, and certainly to the stadium. And so there's been discussions in advance with the NFL Host Committee as well as Metro Transit Police. And so I was not part of those meetings, but that is my understanding as to why on game day, in order to get the thousands of people that have to get into that game in a timely fashion, that is why those trains are going to be restricted to just ticket holders for game day Sunday. And again, I was not a part of those conversations, but from a security apparatus standpoint, that's one of the reasons why.
And will it just be for game day, or is it going to impact the entire weekend?
Chair Cano to Councilmember Jenkins, my understanding is it'd be for game day, and I don't know what time they'll stop that service. I don't know if anybody here knows, but I don't know what time they'll stop discontinuing that service Sunday morning. I'm not sure, but my understanding is game day.
Okay. Thank you.
All righty. Any more questions for this section of the agenda? I'm looking, okay, Councilmember Ellison.
Jenkins' question. To what extent is it practically enforceable? Let's say some people who aren't ticket holders, who are residents, do end up on, using the train that day. Are they going to be arrested, or like what? To what extent? Like I get that there's sort of this restriction, but to what extent is it practically enforceable?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Ellison, my understanding is that prior to, once those trains are kind of empty and swept and clean, there's going to be a very vigorous security process so that any individual trying to gain access, there will be security screening checkpoints before they can even enter. So if there was any sort of confusion with a community member about trying, it would be dealt with prior to them even being able to board. So, yeah.
Okay.
All righty. Chief, thank you so much for entertaining all of our questions and for bringing your leadership team to meet us. We're excited to continue to work with you. I know Inspector Frisell has already reached out to me and let me know his contact information. I would encourage all the inspectors to do the same with their ward representatives, because if things happen during this period of time, it's really important to communicate directly and efficiently to be able to have a coordinated and healthy response. I know you all will be working overtime, and we're here to make sure that everyone's safety and rights are protected that day. So with that, appreciate your presentation, and we will move on to the next item. So thank you all, and we'll be working with you more this year. So with that, this is the number 7. So we'll just receive and file this presentation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And number 8 is the Minneapolis Fire Department Super Bowl presentation activities. So another one of our divisions ready and willing to let us know how they're currently looking at this and getting ready. Yep. So please feel free to get your items up. Welcome. Do you have a cold?
Ready?
Yeah.
I've been sick all weekend.
Oh, no.
It's been a long few days.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Feel free to go
Awesome.
ahead. Mhm.
Commissioner Cano, committee members, thank you for allowing me to present this afternoon. I'm proud to say I'm John Friedel, Chief of Minneapolis Fire Department. I thought I would just quickly go give you a brief department summary to fill you in on some of the latest updates to the department, and then end with a very brief Super Bowl summary, and I'll answer any questions you might have in regard to that. Department was established in 1859, and it was not my year of hire, but that's when it was established. We have a present budget of 2018 adopted budget of $67 million, of which about $2 million is from outside funding. At the present time, we're at 411 sworn personnel with 9 civilians. We have 3 core programs that we've had for a number of years. We've talked on them a number of times up here, and that is fire suppression, training and recruitment, and also community risk reduction and outreach. Those are our 3 primary programs we've had for a number of years. And we're sort of a small, not a small department, but in terms of the scope of what we do, we're very focused on what we do. We're not a overarching, overreaching department. We're very focused on what we do. I think we're very effective in what we do. Our org chart, we are a very small organization. A lot of departments our size have staff that are much larger than mine, but we have been very efficient and very effective throughout the years, and very proud of what we've accomplished. There is an org chart that's on the screen at the present time. My staff is not here, and I'm glad they're not, because we'd be here if I wouldn't introduce my staff. I just thought I'd show you a picture of some of the staff that were here, rather than have them come up and talk about firefighting, and we would never get out of here. So I have a very, very diverse staff, and I'm very proud of each and every one of them. They have just done an effective job throughout the years in their areas of responsibility. The slide in regard to the map of the city, you can see how it's kind of broken down. We've broken down into 5 districts. When I came back as chief, we had 4 districts. It was 1, 2, and 3 in the south side of the city, and then the 4th district was the entire north half of Minneapolis. I thought that was administratively very hard to manage, so we broke the pie down. We added 1 more piece to go to the 5th district, which it did a couple of things. It made it easier to manage, but it also started to improve and create some opportunity of internal promotion from within the department, try to move the dial or push that rock through wet sand a little bit to create some internal opportunity and optimism for some of the folks on the department. We have a daily staffing level of 102 firefighters. We have 19 stations, 5 districts led by a battalion chief, and so we have 5 battalion chiefs working daily, and they each meet every morning with a deputy chief. Interesting piece about our department with 19 fire stations on 3 shifts, that if you start doing the math, that's 50 some odd family units. And so culturally where we differ is we spend 24 hours a day together. And just like kids, they start to fight and they'll start to kibitz and they do this, and then pretty soon Dad has to step in and say, listen, but they are very, very good. And the beauty of this, and where I think we have a unique perspective over a lot of the departments in the city, we have a lot of touches in this community. We are a very busy department. We touch this community a lot. We see the challenges of this community. I think that we have the ability to effectively react to this community and some of the needs and the challenges of this community because of those touches that we have in the areas that we have responsibility for. I think that's really important. And if you look at some of and that's kudos to the firefighters in this department. They just have done a really, really effective job for me. Again, 2016 calls for service, we're up at 49,000 calls. That is a lot of calls for service. And predominantly, a lot of those calls are, quite frankly, EMS. We have our medical calls are skyrocketing. I think as you see the changes in aging community, obviously, and the impact of that, the changes in the healthcare system, obviously, is changing some of that. The challenge for the future going in the department going forward, I think, quite frankly, we really need to seriously look at how we are going to, what role we're going to play in some kind of a mobile integrated healthcare program. I think we have to change and look at a different type of program. Our delivery model has to be more effective, more efficient. It has to have, I think, in opinion, when it comes to an outcome-based revenue share type scenario with some of the payers. So when we look at some of the big ACOs that are out there, if we can help bend their cost curve, I think that should be reflected back to us. So they can help us bend some of the costs of having the big red fire truck run down the street that's inefficient, ineffective. And so I think those are some of the challenges going forward. The biggest one that can be looked at, we've taken a lot of steps to try to improve that. Community EMT is coming down the pipe. That's legislatively been passed. We've got some curriculum that is now being developed that we have sent some firefighters through, where they can start doing some patient visits for folks who've got qualifying conditions who've been released from hospitals to try to, and what this is really doing is trying to bend or reduce that readmittance rate back into the ER system. Many of the folks in our community, their only access to healthcare is 911. If we can be that point of connectivity where we can connect the dots for them to say, we don't have to call 911, but you can do this through our visits. You call this number, we can help you get connected to food, to medication, to family support, to whatever you might need. Those are the types of things I think we really need to identify moving forward. And I think that's where the fire service around the country has to go. There's just no doubt in my mind. If you look at that map on the page here, this is a map for demand for service from 2007. If you look at the green in that map and on the left-hand side, and very little red in that map. And then if you look at the map on the right-hand side from 2016, there's very little green and there's a lot of red. And those are calls, we're up to over, I think that was over 2,000 calls for service in just some of those small blocks. So, and you can see it's shared across this city. It's pretty dramatic over the years. With that, and obviously another challenge is also in our workforce plan. We are certainly facing the silver tsunami like many departments are, and we developed a work plan a few years ago. We've been steadfast in trying to stay with that plan. We tried to reduce that attrition bubble that was built into the system. We used to hire the big classes of 30 people, and then they would just go through a career, and all of a sudden all 30 would leave. So few years ago, we just developed a plan that we would hire smaller classes and just sort of go up above or authorized, come back down through attrition again to try to bend that cost curve. So the chief 20 years down the road is not going to have face the same issue that we're facing today. It's very, very challenging. So it's an effective tool we've used. We've managed to stay on track with that. It does have been a little bit of moderate growth in there because I think that the demands for service, especially in the downtown area here, is something that we need to address to make sure we maintain. I think it's going to be very, very important. And you can see through the top of the slide, if you look at the retirement timeline, in 2022, 37% of our workforce will be up for retirement or leaving. So it's even hiring classes of 15 and 20 that barely keeps up at that rate. So we are facing the potential of, oh boy, but I think we've been able to maintain. That's why I think the assumptions that we've made within this work plan, I think, have been effective, and I'd like to continue to stay with that. One thing that we're very proud of in this department traditionally is the makeup of our workforce and the diversity that's made up our workforce. Unfortunately, through attrition, a lot of our diversity has left. So I felt that it was time that we used to buy tests and we'd recruit and train them and hire people, and we'd give them a test. We'd spend thousands of dollars on a test, which was ineffective. So we really changed our process this year, not only through recruitment, but also testing. So we eliminated the written exam, and we had people apply. They obviously have to meet the physical and psychological criteria and a physical exam to come on the job. But we basically ranked their applications. So people were given credit for being city residents, speaking a second language, some of the education that they had, whether it be advanced education, were given credit for that. Obviously, veterans were given some credit. So we ended up with a hiring list. Now we have it that we just hired off. Of matter of fact, the list that you can see here is 41.2% persons of color. I don't know if that's ever happened before I know in the history of this department, I don't think we've ever had a list that's been with that kind of a makeup, which is something that we're very, very proud of. When we eliminated the written exam, we got some eyebrow raising, but I thought that was a very effective tool, and I think we're going to prove that out, that it was really effective. We just hired a class. We handed out conditional job offers in January, actually late December. They will be starting February 12th. We've got a class of 21 starting off of this list. A very, very diverse group of folks, and I think that we're going to find that they're going to be excellent employees throughout the history of their careers. And then obviously our EMS Pathways Academy, which we are certainly something that I wanted to do for a long time, especially to trying to get ahead of what's going to happen with mobile integrated healthcare and how that program is going to have to function and work and who can do that work. I thought that it was an opportunity. Not only did we get into the Pathways program in the academy and some of the community and give some of the young adults in the community an opportunity to maybe consider a career in the fire service, but maybe in the medical field. And you could see by the makeup of those classes, they were 88% persons of color and almost 50% female. So it's been, and we've got a couple pictures of our 17 Pathways Academy. These is a graduating class on that particular, this particular year, which was 2016 was another class, and I'm proud to say that in working in collaborative partnership with Hennepin County Medical Center, some of those youth got an opportunity to become, got scholarships to go to paramedic training, and some are also working as dispatchers right now with Hennepin County Medical Center, which has been awesome. One of the unique stories that has come out of that, one of the young women who had been hired as a dispatcher over there got her first paycheck. And she looked at it and she said, I've never had this much money. Can I go buy a car? And we said, maybe we should give them a class in economics, but it's amazing what we can do in changing one of these young adults' lives if we can just give them an opportunity, and that's what this program has done. Obviously, we're very proud of the fact we were recognized by Black Lawyers Association in 2017 with an award for some of the work we've done. We continue to work with the community in community risk reduction and outreach. We have a division of one, and Cassidy Anderson just does a wonderful job within the community, talking to young youth and in the cities, schools, with a lot of touches in in that area. In terms of Super Bowl, we have obviously our role is a little bit different than law enforcement. You know, we have a little bit different role. When we first started planning for this 18 months ago, I told our folks, let's just be really good at what we do. You know, what can happen in the Super Bowl is probably not going to change so much what we do. We're still going to go to fires. We're going to go to EMS events. We're going to go to technical rescue. We're going to go to hazardous materials events. Let's just be really good and really professional in what we do. And so that's what they've done. We are going to obviously respond to fire and medicals and technical rescues, hazardous materials. We are going to support all of the areas, all the venue sites that have been established and their command posts. We will have presence in each of those command posts. I will give kudos to all of the enterprise partners that we've had to plan with for the last 18 months, whether it be Emergency Management Director Lane working in the EOC and preparing for that. In support of that, working for our law enforcement partners, our collaborative effort with Hennepin County. Public Works, kudos to Robin and her staff. They've just done an effective job. And I'll be honest with you, I feel pretty confident where we're at right now. I've been through 1 million tabletop exercises. I'm about tired of talking about tabletop exercises. But, you know, we've been exercised to death. And I just feel that I think we're very well prepared. I think law enforcement's done a really good job. I'm hoping that this will be an event that people are going to come, that Minneapolis is going to shine, people are going to enjoy. We're going to do the Skull chant like crazy and, you know, maybe cheer home the Vikes for a victory. We'll see what happens with that. So, thank you. I'll take any questions.
Wonderful. We do have a question in queue here from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. And I will say in all the briefings, I've been very impressed with all of the emergency preparations. So I just want to thank everybody, both the police who presented earlier and folks whose presentations are to come, for all of the tabletop exercises and everything else that's gotten us to a point that we're kind of ready for a lot of different things. Living in downtown East, as I and a lot of my constituents do, we've had some questions about now there's going to be this gigantic event between us and HCMC. And so in thinking about just emergency response for more mundane calls, I feel like you guys are ready for the big stuff, but then the sort of run-of-the-mill heart attack at the Bridgewater, what's the plan to make sure that we're maintaining the sort of standard emergency response for folks who live in the neighborhood around the stadium?
Thank you, Chairman McConnell, Councilmember Fletcher. I'm glad you asked that question. It's a wonderful question because you reminded me to make a point that I wanted to make. And that point is this: we've spent 18 months planning for this big event. We have not forgotten about the rest of the city. You know, this rest of the city is really, really important. We could have a gas line, a main break somewhere out south. I could have a 3-alarm fire. I could have that heart attack over here. I realize that. And we are going to be staffed up over and above what we normally do staff all around the ring downtown to protect everybody's downtown. Fortunately, with what I've been able to do this time with some of the demand for our service we've had, some of we've been able to get reimbursed for some of the costs. So it's really been nice to be able to hire a few extra firefighters and make sure we maintain protection. But I've also been able to recover some costs and some of the EMS stuff that's required of us during Super Bowl events. So we are definitely well prepared. I certainly have not forgotten about the folks who live downtown, and it is challenging. And I guess one thing I would look forward to, hopefully in the next, I won't see it, but in 2020 or 2022, you'll see a nice brand new fire station sitting on 5th Avenue and 3rd Street. That'll be a 4-bay station with hopefully Rescue 1, Engine 1, hopefully some kind of an ambulance running out of that. Something to do with over there, great health care. And we've also got another fire station 11 in the queue also. So we're in really good shape, and I look forward to the future. And I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Just one more, just to specifically drill down. So there's some folks in Ward 3 who live inside the security perimeter. So the folks in Emmanuel Housing and the folks who are right around the Commons, are they going to be served by folks who are already inside the perimeter? I think I remember hearing there's a little bit of a different plan for making sure that they're served.
In terms of perimeter on the station?
The security perimeter around the stadium, right? So there's going to be checkpoints that are potentially challenging to get across if in an emergency. And so I want to make sure that people who live inside the perimeter are
What we can do, we're certainly watching how that perimeter is being built, and I know there's going to be 2 barriers and a double barrier fence, and I'm certainly concerned about response, not only through and around that area to get to other parts of the city. We've been planning that for a year and a half, and one thing I've been adamant on is emergency access, and I've been assured there will be. It's a big red fire truck that can go through a lot of fence if we have to, but we will get there. And but the way the plan looks, I'm very confident that we're going to be able to effectively respond. Now, one thing I will say about around the stadium, they are building that out today, and it's going to be impacted, but that's a one-day event. And it's on a Sunday, it's on a non-work day. We're going to be busy down here. I realize that. It'd be, I think, a lot different challenge if we were looking at a multi, 7-day, 8-day type scenario where we have multiple days. So I think I feel very confident we're going to be able to effectively respond. We'll have additional resources in and around the stadium to address those issues. Very welcome.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Chief. I wanted to circle back to the EMS Pathways program.
Yes.
I just wanted to point out that I volunteer frequently at YouthLink, and quite a few of the young folks that I've worked with have applied for the program. And so it's an amazing program that I think does not get enough, it's not raised and praised enough. So I wanted to say thank you for that work. And also there has been a high school program as well. I wanted to hear a little, so we can hear a little bit more about that work.
Committee Chair Cano, excuse me, and committee member, we had two high school programs. We had one in Roseville. Now we're in our 3rd season with that. That has been a very effective program. A couple of graduates I know that I can talk about have been accepted in medical school at St. Thomas. So I think that we've created an opportunity. We were also in North High at the same time. North was more challenging. It's challenging because they do an EMR curriculum and also an EMS curriculum. And when you get into EMT, it's a very challenging curriculum. And at North High, we were only able to get enough time a day to do a typical class, so a 40-minute class. To try to deliver that curriculum in 40 minutes at a time, it just was not effective. So now with the Roosevelt program, which still goes on today, 1 day a week they spend at Hennepin County every Wednesday. If you want to go down and see them, they would love to have you come down and talk to them because they're every Wednesday and they spend the entire day going through the EMS program. Now, and EMS and actually EMR, which also would qualify them for those that have struggled, they could qualify for EMS Academy, which you will be recruiting for in the next probably the first part of March. End of March, we'll start recruiting for our next group. So we're going to continue that.
Wonderful. I'm seeing here if there's any more questions from committee members. I do have a question on the, you showed a little pie graph with all the different kinds of responses that the fire department goes to respond to. Wondered if you could just briefly touch on the opioid overdoses and the numbers and where in that pie graph those would fall, because I recall you and I talked about this a while ago and that the numbers are going up. So I'd love to just have our committee members get a sense of those numbers and sort of how they've moved throughout the years, just sort of from a high level perspective.
Sure. Chair McConnell, we have talked about this several times. I started in 2015. I asked the question because I always looking at runs, and I started seeing some trends in terms of just trending in overdoses. I said, how many do we have roughly? Yeah, that would have been in maybe 14 numbers into 15. And I think we had roughly around 125 to 150 overdose events, not necessarily categorized as an opioid, but overdoses. Mm-hmm. And I asked our medical director at the time, I said, do you think it's time for us to maybe consider carrying Narcan? Because I start to see this, starting to whatever this is. And through some discussion, he said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. So we went through the training and we purchased that. And we implemented, carrying Narcan in May of 2016. Since then, unfortunately, we've had over 435 saves since that time in opioid overdoses. Mm-hmm. That is a lot. And I knew that it was at epidemic levels a year ago. And finally, we're starting to hopefully bring some light in this and we can address this issue. It's an issue that faces this community. It affects all families, and it doesn't discriminate. It's from all over the city. If you look at the map where these runs are at, it is all over the city. You know, there are little deeper pockets, but it affects us all, and it is amazing. Hopefully, we're going to continue to carry it. You know, I've worked hard to try to, and of course, as soon as you make that move to do that, of course, the price triples and everything else goes skyrockets, and then they make it challenging. But we've been able to come up with some reimbursement pathways to help us offset some of our costs with that. But it's something we're going to continue to do. And I thank you for your work and effort in regard to that.
Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate the summary of your department's work, especially as our committee is newly formed and established. The work that you mentioned about addressing the opioid abuse issue is being tackled head-on by our new mayor. And so I invite colleagues on this committee, if you want to be involved in those conversations, there are meetings in the works with the mayor's office to talk about the multi-jurisdictional task force that he wants to put together to address the opioid abuse problem that we see in Minneapolis. But, you know, we did hear a lot about the Super Bowl initiatives from the police officers and our police department, and I'm pretty sure that you've been hand in hand with them. So I feel like we've covered all questions here, and I appreciate you coming in, even though you got a little bit of a cold. We do appreciate your time, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with that, that is item number 8. And so we will go ahead and receive and file this portion of the presentation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we will move on to number 9, Emergency Management Departmental Operations and Super Bowl Preparation Activities. So once again, this is an overview and introduction to our committee of all the different functions that exist and report to this committee. So we have our staff director here, Barrett Lane, who will walk us through a brief introduction of the department and touch on anything that's related to the preparations for the Super Bowl safety and security issues. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Barrett Lane. I'm the Director of the Office of Emergency Management. I'm here to brief you today, as you indicated, just a quick overview on what emergency management does, and then how we're bringing those capabilities to bear in terms of Super Bowl preparedness. So we'll step through this fairly quickly. The first thing I'm going to do is break your computer. So.
Well, we should have wireless.
There we go. I'm going to start with our vision statement. So we're in the resilience business, and what we want to achieve here, and really hand in hand with our new Chief Resilience Officer, who we've been having a lot of conversation with, is to promote overall resilience within the organization and resilience within the community. And by that, we mean the ability to bounce back from shocks. In our instance, it's going to be those natural disasters, those human-caused disasters, but obviously that's one piece of the overall resilience puzzle that the city is working on as a whole. So from a mission standpoint, we basically, this mirrors very much what the federal government is doing. And it recognizes a couple things. So I want to step through this in a couple parts. First of all, we talk about protecting the people who live, work, and play here, not just in the city of Minneapolis, but across the state and across the nation. Our emergency management organization, indeed most emergency management organizations, are part of a network and web that's really national. We provide or get some of our funding from the federal government at a national level to develop national level capabilities. We, of course, also serve the community here. If we had not been preparing for the Super Bowl, we very likely would have had people in Florida, in Puerto Rico, or other places this summer as part of that network. There was a contingent from this region that went to Florida and served in EOC's Emergency Operations Center. So we're part of that overall network of emergency management that we deploy nationally. And this mission statement also talks about 4 main mission areas that we're in, so sort of 4 main buckets of work that we deal with. And that's that mitigation against, so mitigation, how do we change our physical or legal environment to buy down risk, preparedness, response, and recovery. So those are the 4 areas that we sort of sort our work into, and that's consistent with national best practices and how most organizations are looking at this type of work. Lastly, to emphasize that we're an all-hazards organization. That means that it really doesn't matter what causes the incident complexity or the problem or the disaster, whether it be natural disaster, whether it be human-caused. We want to make sure that our systems are flexible enough to respond to whatever causes it, because ultimately the outcomes are oftentimes the same. So we want to make sure that we have a flexible system along those lines. So how do we do this? How do we do that? How do we accomplish that mission? The first thing we did was we looked at our organizational mandates, and there are some things that we just have to do, whether it's because there's a council mandated ordinance in place, and there is. State law provides us particular direction, as well as our code of ordinances. In the council resolution from 2005, the city council adopted the National Incident Management System, which we've talked about in other briefings. That's really that overall system that binds that network together, that allows us to move resources and personnel seamlessly across jurisdictions and across agencies. So the council has mandated that for the city of Minneapolis, and that's part of our mission. NFPA 1600 is the national standard that applies to emergency management and business continuity programs. And we're using that as a vehicle to maintain and achieve compliance with that National Incident Management System. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But what that does is gives us a defined structure for the organization so that we know what business lines we're in, what business lines we're not, and kind of what our scope and breadth is, again, consistent with other best practices. So what's the definition of what we're doing here? We're carrying out all those non-military functions to prevent, minimize, repair injury, damage caused by disasters, enemy attack, sabotage, or other hostile action, or natural catastrophe or disturbance. Our ordinance is very much drafted and written in the 1950s, and a lot of the 1950s civil defense concepts kind of carry forward here. We're really the inheritor of their legacy, if you will, and the preparedness activities that went on there. But really this reflects in our own ordinances those four main mission areas. So we're going to prepare for, and we're going to respond to and recover from those natural and other events. And ultimately, even within the state law or ordinance, it's recognized that emergency management is a cross-cutting function. So Jessica Jensen, who's the chair of the NDSU Emergency Management Program, talks about this being a distributed function. Police, fire, public works, public health, CPED. There's very few parts of this organization that aren't involved in emergency management in some level or another at some time or another as we look through those various functions. So it's our function to kind of gather all those threads together and make sure that we work in a unified and coordinated way. So what's our strategy? Our strategy is to use that national or that NFPA 1600. It says you're going to have the following capabilities. You're going to have an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center. You're going to have an Emergency Operations Plan. It's a checklist. So it gives us an ability to go through and say, yes, we have that, and it's up to this standard. So we build out those capabilities. We make sure that we can address those organizational mandates. And our strategy here is to be ready for accreditation within our organization. Now, we're going to have to make a decision as an organization whether we want to pursue that, because that has to be accredited at the organization level. So all of those owners of the distributed function are going to have to be agreed. But we're using this accreditation program to frame and shape our program so that we're doing the right thing at the right level for this particular organization. So within emergency management, we're building things out to make sure that we're ready for that program should it come. So that's what's giving our program a shape and focus. Emergency management was reorganized significantly in 2011, 2012. I was hired to come in and take another look at this, and the NFPA program was part of that reorganization. So we set ourselves on this path back in 2012, 2013, and have been consistently working toward building those capabilities over time. What we need to do, so let's assume that we've achieved that accredited program or accreditable program. That would then represent ultimately what the current service level is. We're still under sort of this development program as we go forward here. But we need to be able to connect the budget dollars that you provide with the outcomes that we measure. And as we build out each capability, then we look at those outcome measures and we ask ourselves, is that a way we can measure the effectiveness of that particular component of it? So over the last few years and into the next couple of years, we'll continue to build out those components till we can basically bring that package to you and say, here's what you get for this amount of money. It's going to meet national standards, and then you can feel confident that that represents a reasonable preparedness bundle, if you will, for the community. The thing to remember with these organizations is, and indeed any organization, As we found out in California, or perhaps a number of instances you can think of, these things can be overwhelmed. Anything that can be built can be overwhelmed. If CAL FIRE can be overwhelmed, we can be overwhelmed. So what we need to do is do our due diligence, and we need to be able to go out to our neighbors and say, look, we did our best. And that means we have to balance the amount of resources that go into this versus other worthy causes, and make sure that there's outcomes tied to that. So that's our strategy of building this out at that accreditable level. And I can't emphasize the partnerships enough. We really rely on our police, fire, public works, public health, administrative, and many other people and organizations to get our job done. We had a federal conference call, and this is jumping ahead in the story a little bit, where there were several hundred people on that call. Different agencies who are coming talking about Super Bowl preparedness. That's that network in action. And we reach out to that network responds, and you should really be proud of, in fact, all citizens should be proud of the way that this system is working, right from the local government all the way up to the federal government in terms of the support that we've received for this special event. Here's those four components as what's usually called the emergency management cycle. And you can see conceptually each one of these sort of drives into the next. And the idea is to have a sense of continuous improvement. So as we prepare and mitigate, we want to go into take those capabilities into response. We do an after action report, we learn our lessons, we drive that back into the recovery, and then we basically change our plans, change our capabilities, adjust our capabilities and our outcomes so that we can learn through the process of the cycle going round and round. So each of these plans, each of these capabilities gets touched on a regular basis. The emergency operations plan, maybe only 3 or 4 years on a cycle. Other things get touched more often, but we drive that continuous improvement through the system in this fashion. We want to talk just real briefly about each of those components to give you a sense of the scope of what we do. Prevention and mitigation, this is one of these very distributed functions within the organization. There's a lot of this stuff going on now, but we've formed a working group of those various staff components to make sure that we're working on that together. So that's that type of process. Again, a lot of what we do is that coordination. We're going to make sure that those pieces are coming together in an organized way. A challenge in this area is having to do with mitigation projects and our capital planning process. A lot of times, following a federally declared disaster, of which we've had several since 2012, there's mitigation grant money available from the federal government to provide, you can build safe rooms or other projects that are more of a capital nature. The problem is that it comes with a 25% match. And our capital system is oftentimes, we don't have 25% of large projects set aside to take advantage of that match. So we're working with finance and others this next year to see if we can come up with a better way to draw down those funds and submit proposals and projects in that context into the future when those dollars are available. And then lastly, we support our partners in Hennepin County with the County Mitigation Plan, which is really the fundamental document that talks about threats, hazards, and risks at a county level. We do a lot of work in preparedness. We do our hazard risk assessment, resource needs analysis. You can read the list here of some of the things that we do. We just completed our emergency operations plans. We went and built that from the ground up last year. Last year's council has approved that, and we really appreciate that. We've got a great document and great foundation, a sort of doctrinal foundation going into the Super Bowl here. The next thing that we'll be launching here within the organization following the Super Bowl is our continuity of operations and continuity government refresh. This was last touched the major way back in 26, 27. We tuned it up in about 2012, 2013, having to do with human capital preparedness and pandemic preparedness. But we're going to come back and do a major refresh of this whole system in 2018, this year. So this is going to be a big chunk of our work. And I did want to introduce Alec Bruns, who is our finance and admin section chief, and he's going to be driving that project citywide here. So you'll be hearing more about that. And that continuity of operations is how do we continue our essential functions, essentially under all capabilities? What if a disaster impacts our people, our business, our facilities, our capabilities, how are we going to recover? We need to serve both the external community, but also our internal communities. We have a education, training, testing, and exercising program. And then we manage $1 million of federal grant money each year. Some of that goes to support our operations, and some of it goes to one-time and other projects distributed across the organization. One of the things that we do is we own and operate the outdoor warning siren system. And this has really been a success story that we've looked at over the last 3 or 4 years. The sirens were due for refresh. They've all got new siren systems with new battery backups and new radio controllers in them. The thing to remember here is that we don't activate the sirens, but we do own and operate the system. Hennepin County is the warning point. Our MECC 911 is a backup warning point. And most of the time with weather-oriented things, it's really the National Weather Service that decides when the sirens are going to sound. What we did was we looked at the map of siren coverage, and we were going to refresh this and make sure that we had a standard coverage across the city. And we found that there were a number of places just on a sound coverage basis, particularly in North Minneapolis, where there was a gap. Now, most people are not going to call and complain that their sirens are not loud enough. If anything, they usually complain about the other. But we did want to make sure that we had a standard and uniform coverage. So as we relocated these, we made sure that those gaps got closed. One of the things we're in the process of doing right now is doing that for downtown. And we did a number of sound studies to make sure that we were sizing those sirens and placing them in places where we could balance, the burden of having a siren with the ability to cover as much room as possible. So we're combining small and large sirens downtown so we can get a decent level of coverage and outdoor warning, particularly with all the activity that's going on downtown in the summer, that we can get that outdoor warning product delivered to people in a comprehensive way. So we'll be finishing that capital project up this summer. One of the other things that we do is we do damage assessment following large windstorms, tornadoes, and that sort of thing. So we have a rapid damage assessment team. This is cross-disciplinary and cross-agency. We can pull together a group of people to essentially get a quick look on, how big and how bad a particular event is. This is the 2013 windstorm. We drove into this coming back from the Boundary Waters, and we dropped the canoe, and I went back to work, and this is what some of our neighborhoods were looking like in 2013. But we launched into an extensive damage assessment process. The key to that is to get data into the hands of the county so that they can get that to FEMA. That's the trigger, how much damage you have and how much you can estimate it to get that federal assistance flowing into the city. One of the other things we've been doing with respect to national and local preparedness is we have a large cache of equipment for moving and managing special needs personnel. So as a result of a nursing home evacuation that the state incident management team participated in 2009, we identified just simple moving equipment as being a barrier to moving folks with mobility needs. So we have a stockpile of equipment that's both locally and nationally deployable: wheelchairs, walkers, quad canes, Hoyer lifts, you name it. If we have to move folks, we've got something to help do that. So that is available. We also have worked with the Red Cross. These blue pods that you can see here are standardized cotton blanket pods. So we can send those to shelters wherever they're needed as a supplement to what they normally have on hand. And those are all standardized. They roll out. There's a set number of cots and blankets in each one, so completely modular. We also have a small animal sheltering capability. So we need to, if you want to evacuate people, if you want to move people, you have to deal with their pets. We have the ability to surge a small animal shelter in a neighborhood, ours or other throughout the state, up to 500 additional animals. So we have all the equipment necessary. They would have to supply the personnel and the drugs and that sort of thing, but we would be able to bring that in just to give them the capability to assure people that if their pets are being taken care of so that we can take care of them. So that's, again, another regional gap that we've helped. A lot of this was grant funded, and we really appreciate the partnership from the federal government making these resources available. From the response protocol, we operate 24/7. There's always someone on watch. So someone is monitoring incidents that may require our assistance. And as we've talked about in the overall briefing, emergency management really doesn't kick in until the resources or the capabilities of those first responders are exhausted. And as you've heard today, the capabilities of our first responding community are really quite robust. Nevertheless, if they need help, we're the people that they reach out to. So we operate at that layer between the standing capability of whatever department it is and the ability to focus really the whole enterprise's resources and expertise on that problem. We don't take command. Okay? We are not commanders, we are coordinators. We don't take command of these incidents, we support those incident commanders in the field. So here's a number of the things that we do. Our Emergency Operations Center is set up so that we can work that physically or virtually. You'll have an opportunity to see that in action over the next couple weeks, but it's a major lift to move enough people up there to operate a physical Emergency Operations Center. We've borrowed this best practice from the private sector by being able to do it virtually and by teleconference and be linked with computers. And that allows us essentially to respond faster with a lighter touch on the organization as far as resources goes. You can see some of the other things here. Federal, local, mutual aid, we talked about that network of partnerships that we respond to. So I'm part, and my staff is part of the state incident management team. We go and assist with various disasters and emergencies across the state or necessary at the national level. This just, you think, what do we face here generally? It's in, most of the time it really is weather. This is the 2013 storm damage map, and you can see that, this was not a tornado, this was a straight line wind event, but there really wasn't part of the city that wasn't touched. And when power lines are down and trees are across your road and trees are across your car, this is pretty disruptive for the community and those folks who need mobility, who need to have 911 responses attended to. Our ability to respond to an event like this, it's not always the tornado. It's even times this sort of widespread wind event. And as we see climate change driving these, particularly the large sudden rain events where you get a high volume, small time period rain event, that localized flooding is becoming more of a problem. But we've had a number of federally declared disasters in this area. And again, it's not just the tornadoes that we're addressing. This was the next year in 2014, and up in the right-hand corner, if you recall the mudslide that happened along West River Road. And so we were part of the damage assessment team for that. So recovery. Recovery is one of the areas where, response is one of the things where you get a lot of focus on, but recovery is where the hard work starts. So recovery is about returning that community back to whatever the new normal is going to be. It could be back to where they started, could be back to better. But that recovery is something that ultimately OEM is responsible driving in a planful and organized way, working with the communities and working with you to identify those objectives. That means that damage assessment, and we would coordinate that team. Really, again, this is something that the 7 of us are not going to do by ourselves. We draw local, regional, nonprofit, private sector folks into these recovery efforts. And we also are the funnel by which that state, local, and federal relief comes in. So we manage that process as well. Here's our team as it stands right now, or I guess will stand as of a couple months ago. This has 8.5 FTEs. We're arranged as an incident management organization day to day, just to minimize the shift between day-to-day operations and emergency operations center operations. What we've really done is taken all of the pieces of NFPA 1600, so that's standard, and I've taken those and I've delegated that to one of the people in my organization. So one of us is responsible for making sure that we are compliant and accreditable in accordance with our strategic plan. So, this is very much a team effort across the small team, but across the larger team as well. So for the Super Bowl, this is about an 18-month planning process. As the Chief Riedel pointed out, there have been a ton of exercises really ramping up in the last few months. What we did is basically cycled through this process twice. We talked about that continuous improvement process. So what we did is set out to actually go through that process twice in preparation for the Super Bowl. So by the end of 2016, we had a plan in place that we were going to use to staff and exercise. That's what we took into our staffing and exercise and training program throughout the middle of 2017. We evaluated that, we restaffed, we replanned, and concluded that by about November of this year, October actually. And that's the plan, that second cycle plan that we're taking into the Super Bowl. So you can see that there's just been a ton of work here. And again, this is not credit to me. This is credit to a very, very broad team, both locally, internally, externally, all the way up to the national government who participated in making this happen. For the Super Bowl, EOC operations up at the Emergency Operations Training Facility up in Fridley, again, 26th through 4th. We'll be generally running 7 a.m. to midnight or later. We are mirroring the incident command organizations that we support. So our hours are pretty much driven by what they're doing. This facility will be accessed and controlled and secured throughout that time period. The mission of the EOC during this time will be to provide that resource assistance and support the incident command. That's our basic function. We're going to be doing that, obviously. We're also maintaining readiness for that response and recovery activity should it be needed. We expect this to be a really, really great special event. And we expect everything to go well and people have a great time. We need to be prepared, but this is not an incident. This is not an emergency, and we're not treating it as such. This is going to be great. But we do need to be prepared. And I just want to assure you that we've got those pieces in place. And the other thing that we'll be doing is maintaining ongoing connection with all of our regional partners, with the state and the federal government partners throughout this time period. Again, just so that we're primed and ready in the event that something happens or some folks out in the field need support. So overall staffing, from the 7.5 people we have right now, we're surging up to 120 people. We've done that in less than a year, and I'm really proud of the team that did that. My team has really done an excellent job making this happen. So we're going to be deployed in 2 shifts. We have the capability, because we've got 3 teams, to run 24/7, running people at 8s, and they would have 2 shifts off. So we have a lot of depth of capability built here. Most of these folks are city employees who are working in other jobs. So we really, really appreciate those department heads making these folks available for supporting us in the EOC. But we also have federal and state support. The U.S. Coast Guard is supplying us with subject matter experts to lead our planning sections, for instance. We really appreciate that. During this time, we'll be maintaining connection with either virtual or physical 72 different organizations. And that could grow or shrink, but that's kind of what the count is right now. That gives you an idea of some of the scope of what we're dealing with. We'll have 10 city departments represented in the EOC. The state, the county, FEMA Region 5 has been outstanding in their support of us throughout this process. FEMA Region 5, based out of Chicago, their team has been excellent. Regional partners, federal agencies, private and nonprofit groups. So really the whole community is represented in this preparedness effort. This is really our basic function. This is the flow of requests. So if the incident commander needs something, it flows from the bottom, from that unified incident command. The chief talked about, Chief Arredondo talked about the multi-agency command center. That's really the on-the-ground tactical operation. Drives up to the local EOC. If we don't have it, we go to the state EOC. If the state EOC doesn't have it, under the right conditions, we can go to the federal government and have access to national resources. Now, there's some legal triggers in there, but that's basically how the system works. And it's really our function to make sure that that pipeline is open. So we have the right people in the right places to do that. Here's a really simple block chart of kind of the pieces that are moving right now. So the Emergency Operations Center, that's where that coordination function takes place. That's up at the OTF. We're going to be serving either that MPD, Multi-Agency Command. The Health Department, Departmental Operations Center will also be open. We'll be providing them with service. And in the event that those police officers or firefighters, they're out doing those calls day to day, if they need service, we're going to provide that to them too. So there's a number of customers here. Coordinating laterally with our private and nonprofit folks, as well as our county and regional partners, and then up to the state and federal government. So those are the major moving parts to the operation. And that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. I'm looking at the speaker management to see if any questions come up from our committee members. You've done a wonderful job of walking us through the details of this. And I know earlier, I don't know if it was this week or last week, we spent a lot of time talking about the response, emergency response with a training for new council members, and some of us that were here the previous cycle also joined you. So I feel like we have a pretty good grasp on all of the efforts that are happening around this. You mentioned briefly at that one training we had that there is another person that's sort of on the clock, kind of when you're not reachable, or something like you have like this team, right, of answering the phone 24/7 kind of a
Correct,
thing.
and that's that watch officer program. So
Okay.
it rotates among my team, and basically one of us is a watch officer at all times. My staff, because we have a limited number of staffs, will actually be the people running the EOC operation. So I'll be handling that 24/7 watch, and I'll float during this 2-week period.
Have you ever been part of something that's been that's so significant in size and impact in terms of like an event or some kind of a effort like this before?
Yeah, my involvement in this goes back quite a ways. I was in 2002. My first major event was part of the I think. I'm sorry, perhaps the date is wrong. Anyway, I was part of the Citizen Corps call-up for Hurricane Ivan. So at that point in time, it was one of these multiple hurricane events, and the federal government had basically run out of professional staff, and they mobilized folks that, at that time, I was involved in the Community Emergency Response Teams program here with the city. And we were able to join several hundred of our colleagues from across the country, gather up in Atlanta, Georgia, and then we spent 2 weeks doing community relations work, really taking and making sure that people got connected to FEMA benefits out in rural Mississippi and Alabama. So the places that were actually pretty well hard hit following those hurricanes. So I go back to that. I go back to the experience that perhaps Mayor Ryback has talked about at Mount Weather, the major training exercise. So I've done a number of these. I was part of the EOC staff during the bridge collapse. We ran the EOC during the 4th Precinct protests. So we've had a number of these complex incidents come up over the years, and I've really been privileged to be part of the teams that have served those citizens on those days that are really the worst for them.
Wonderful. We do have a question from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that a lot of the staffing to step up for this has come from internal departments, and I was curious just to know a little bit more about how long people have been gone from their home departments, and if there are particular departments where a lot of the staff that you've pulled into your Super Bowl team have come from.
Madam Chair, Council Member, we've had really good support from really across the organization. So I wouldn't single out anyone as providing better support than anyone else. I think we've really got a great partnership going. But what it is taking these people away from their normal jobs. And in fact, this is one of the things that we hope to institutionalize. We really don't have a way to do this on an ongoing basis. So we're working with our department level teammates to try to figure out how we're going to institutionalize this type of capability. So it's really a big piece of moving toward that accredited standard. But there is a cost to this, as you point out. I mean, the people who need to be trained and become proficient in these operations are not doing something else. And we really recognize the fact that that's happening and that support is really valuable. So, I don't have a number in terms of personnel hours, but there has been training. There have been exercises. We did 3 days of live EOC exercises that each team got to go through a whole EOC cycle. So there's been, each of these folks have really put in some good hours. And obviously during the event itself, we're going to be running one shift after another shift after another shift. So, and some of those are going to run until 2, 3 in the morning. So my message to them is A, thank you, and B, take care of that home front because they're the people who take care of us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your energy here. And so with no further questions on this item, we will go ahead and receive and file this. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And for our final presentation, then we have a review of the city strategy on the prevention of commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking as related to the Super Bowl and beyond. So we will welcome a presentation from the City Attorney's Office and related partners. So welcome Susan Siegel, our City Attorney, to walk us through this very important topic as well as it relates to the Super Bowl. And thank you to our committee members for hanging in here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for your patience this afternoon. And I do have to hand it to Barrett Lane, our emergency manager for the city, because he and his team generally toil in obscurity and desperately try to get people's attention. So I think this is one of the side benefits of the Super Bowl, is that it has refreshed training. It has created the start of muscle memory, and Mr. Lane has done a terrific job. So thank you, and it's nice to see him, above the water line here in City Hall. All right, so sex trafficking. I am just so proud of the work that our city has done. And we've got two of our leaders here on this committee with our chair, Councilmember Cano, and Councilmember Palmisano, who have been engaged, active, continue to push us to do more and to achieve more. So I just could not be more pleased. There's a lot more work to do, but from when we first started diving into this work, not much more than 7 years ago, boy, has a lot of progress been made. So back in the end of 2013, the City Council took a pledge to prevent sex trafficking and to disrupt traffickers and make sure that law enforcement was there and prosecutions were there to hold traffickers and people who would commercially exploit our youth in the city to account. And so we've evolved now to this coordinated plan, multi-agency, multi-jurisdictions. The Women's Foundation, I passed out executive summaries of a couple of foundational research pieces that have been done over time, focused here on Minneapolis, that has really guided our work. And we just could not have better partners and really be working in a coordinated way, because the Super Bowl has been used as a way to further this work long term, because we know sex trafficking occurs. It occurs every day. It's going to occur well after the Super Bowl has come and gone. But we are improving our response. We are coordinating our services and continuing to build out services for survivors and work towards prevention. And so it really is an effort for the beyond, but we're using the Super Bowl as the excuse and the premise. So I'm going to turn this over to the people who are actually doing the work. And we are so lucky here in the city of Minneapolis, because Sergeant Snyder has been our lead investigator since the Minneapolis Police Department first identified this as a need, with a need long before, but we just didn't see it and didn't see these cases. And he is a nationally known expert. And then Beth Holger Ambrose, who's our wonderful executive director of the Link, which has just been an amazing partner with the city and runs our Juvenile Supervision Center, as well as just really extraordinary services for vulnerable youth in our city. And she and her cohort have been in the process of training literally thousands of people in connection with the Super Bowl. So, Sergeant Snyder.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to talk with you today. I have to, I'm very humbled by Susan's words, and I have to say that leadership such as hers, and also a big thanks to all of you. Congratulations on the new faces, and thank you very much for the hard work that you all do in leading this important committee. But it's not without leadership that we would have the opportunity to focus on these type of agendas and these initiatives. And so I really am humbled by the hard work that's been put into this. Let me just take a minute and sort of walk you through a little bit about what our Super Bowl plan is going to look like. A lot of time has gone into this. I was fortunate enough to go to Houston last year and sort of see firsthand the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the way that these things sort of unfolded, and get a perspective on what this may look like in our city. I say may because we really don't know what to expect on some levels. There are a few things that I took away from Houston and we expect to see here, but this is a very different environment. Houston was 85 degrees the day before game day. I don't think it's going to be 85 degrees here, but we have a very different environment for trafficking. And so this is a work in progress that is based upon our best understanding of what happens every day. Couple of questions that sort of form the foundation of what we are doing here and what we're going to be doing during the Super Bowl. And the first was really to ask what's different about about human trafficking during the Super Bowl. What's going to look different? What's going to be different than what we do every day? The great news about us approaching this initiative is we've really been building this for 4 years since I was first approached by our commander. Actually, it's been 6 years now, but 4 years is when our partnership with all these other 23 different agencies, law enforcement agencies, and then as many service providers in the community really started to develop. And so everything we were doing was sort of focused on building a partnership around sex trafficking and around the response to that. The Super Bowl wasn't even sort of on our field of view at that point. This was really about answering these questions of what do we need to do, what can we do better? And so this sort of 3-question idea that I asked people was, what are you getting from the police that you like? What are you getting from the police you don't like? And what are you not getting from the police that you would like to have? And so that really has sort of formulated all those questions and discussions about where we go from here. In addition to what's different during the Super Bowl, how can we protect the vulnerable while interrupting trafficking activity? So those 2 questions have really sort of identified and formed the basis for how we're approaching this. With regard to the first, what's different? Well, we know that there's going to be 1 million+ people that are going to come into the Twin Cities, right? The chief just talked about that. Unfortunately, some of those people, and it has nothing to do with the Super Bowl, but some of those people are going to be here and they're going to engage in the purchase or attempt to purchase commercial sex. Those are the people that I'm primarily concerned about meeting during the Super Bowl. I'm primarily concerned about interrupting that activity. I'm also very concerned about connecting with those victims that might be here, those vulnerable people, whether they're from our city or someone else's city. They're citizens from wherever they come, and I feel a heart for connecting with them, trying to identify where those vulnerabilities are going to be, and a lot of this has to do with sort of being embedded in that marketplace and trying to predict what that looks like. Now, the last time I spoke in front of this committee was maybe a year ago, and that marketplace has evolved so much in that time. There are new websites that we didn't know. Currently, with the assistance of the Washington County Attorney's Office, we're tracking about 24 new websites and postings that are geared just toward operations, criminal operations that are going to be going on here during the Super Bowl with an emphasis on trafficking. And so as comforting as Susan's words are to me, and as much as I would love to take credit for that, these are partnerships of people all over the metro area and from different disciplines that have been able to help us with that. Real broadly, a couple of different aspects to our mission. First of all, identifying and recovering those victims of human trafficking, identifying human trafficking related activity and interrupting that. Oftentimes we have to be very clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And one of the important things, and I put it on the bottom of the list here for a reason, arrest is really sort of far down that list for us, okay? There are not enough handcuffs on this planet for us to really make an appreciable difference. And the chief about 2 months ago said something that's been resonating in the back of my mind. He said, procedural justice is about a lot more than handcuffs. And if there's a thing that I've tried to really sort of teach the cops that are working with me on these operations, it's making connections with people and trying to figure out what is our role in all of this. not every case where we go out and we investigate, we make a recovery, we interrupt activity is going to result in a criminal conviction. If that's how we're measuring our success, I think we're wrong, because there are things that only police can do. And sometimes that ability to connect with people in those environments, to be able to make relationships, sometimes difficult relationships, because let's face it, most of the people that I talk to are on one side of that issue of criminal behavior or another. Just which side of that they're on, frankly, isn't really all that important to me, because there's relationships to be made on both sides of that. And I believe firmly that if we care as much about sort of trying to deal with those offenders as we do dealing with the victims, we apply the same principles on both sides of that equation, and I do think we can make a difference there. Couple of different aspects that we've sort of used here. I talked about the market presence and really being embedded in that marketplace. Also this deconfliction. Right now we've been able to enlist and recruit information from about 12 different other cities, Atlanta, Denver, Houston, just to name a few, LA, New York. And we've received tips back from people that are coming here. One of the things we found out in Houston was there was no deconfliction strategy. How were they going to track people? And we know that there are people, they post on Facebook, hey, I'm going to, taking some people to Houston or whatever. And we found one of those ads. We found one of those Facebook accounts here in Minneapolis. We provide that information. So very early on last year, we started trying to figure out that strategy, and we built a couple of systems in order to try and keep that active. And one of those was our D-Stop system, which we built under a $50,000 state grant. And the whole purpose of this system was to be able to get information available to us. It would come directly to us from these other organizations and agencies, that we wouldn't have to use an email. This is a secure system, runs on Microsoft SharePoint, it's CJIS compliant, which means that if somebody is working in LAPD or an NYPD and they get a tip, they can go in here, they can log in, it's an invitation-only system, and we'll get notified when that information comes in. So this is going to be one of our primary tools around deconfliction from other agencies. We're also working with the International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators out of Florida, and they are providing us real-time current intel analysis on these tips that come in. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but the one thing I do want to tell you is regard to muscle memory principle. One of my takeaways from Houston was that there was a lack of practice. Well, the good news for us is everything we're doing during the Super Bowl, we've been doing for 3.5 years. We stood up our Guardian Angel operation in February of 2014 with a $5,000 grant from the Women's Foundation. And so it's almost been 4 years, actually. And that has sort of not only created the cornerstone of relationship building with law enforcement, but it's also created the primary way that we've been able to sort of approach this problem of what does it mean to be operational in this environment and deal with human trafficking threats, not just recovery and trafficker threats, but also the threats from demand. And that's really, really a big part. So when you think about what's different about here and you think about those 1 million people coming in, we know that the biggest increase in here is going to be demand. And so much of what we're going to do every day, in fact, we're running multiple demand operations all around the metro area, and it's just designed to do that one thing, and that's embed ourselves in the marketplace and interrupt demand. Because those are people who we firmly believe, if we can strangle the demand, if we can stop people from buying sex, we know that those victims are going to be safer. Traffickers aren't going to put victims on Backpage or on Craigslist or out on the street corner if people stop buying sex. And so that's really where the cornerstone of what we're doing is anchored. I don't need to go through our operational plan just to say that all of this is going to be run from our command post. We have multiple venues throughout the city, working in conjunction, I said earlier, with about 23 different agencies from around the metro, working with service providers. We will be running all of this from Minneapolis, and we started hand-picking these teams through our Guardian Angel operation about 2 years ago. And these are all people that know their jobs. We just did a training today with our entire core team, and everybody was out there. I couldn't have been more proud of them. They did a great job. I threw some curveballs at them. What do we do if this happens? And they did it extremely well. They did it very professionally, and that's what we were looking for. Our Guardian Angels, generally speaking, we're going to be running 3 Guardian Angel operations around the metro area. Guardian Angel is a program that we started, as I said, back in 2014. Since that time, we've made 1,000+ arrests in 7 states. That started right here in Minneapolis with a $5,000 grant, and that's a really shocking impact. We, as far away as Raleigh, North Carolina, Pinellas County, Florida, Houston, we've supported these operations from right here. Our conviction rate is over 99% on that for felonies. That's a really high number of convictions, and it's all because I believe of the professionalism of our team and also our partnerships with the county attorneys that we've worked with to make sure that we're not engaging in investigative due process violations, that we're making sure that we're not engaging in entrapment, that everything we do impacts the best behavior, the best practices of these operations. And basically, just to give you an idea, what it looks like is very much like that right there. That's a photo that I took up in Fargo. It's a bunch of people that kind of look like me sitting around a table, posing as that 14-year-old girl on Craigslist or Backpage. I'm sorry for the creepy visual you guys got to live with now, but that's basically what that looks like. And as you can see, as you can imagine, there's a learning curve on that, which is why we had to start doing this so long ago. Essentially, I don't want to go through this entire workflow with you, but there are a whole bunch of different components. And when we do a walkthrough like we did today, we're doing it right from the moment of posting that ad in that environment or going out there and penetrating that marketplace, all the way through that text communication, which is really the cornerstone of building those elements of the crime. And in most cases, it's under this 609324, to getting that individual there, to identifying that venue where they're going to show up, and then figuring out who that person is. Throughout this whole process, we're using our intel analysts to try and provide us the best real-time intelligence on it, and then making an arrest when that's an appropriate thing to do. Now, there is one thing that's not in here. I feel very strongly, because these are people, the first person that we arrested on Guardian Angel committed suicide about a year after he was arrested. And that has stuck with me ever since that day. And so I feel quite strongly about the fact that not only do we need to care for the victims of trafficking, we also need to care for the men that are engaged in trafficking. And to the extent that we're able to do that, some of that involves partnerships in our faith-based community. A lot of these guys are going to lose absolutely everything. Their lives they're never going to look the same from the moment that they show up at that hotel or that single family home. I feel a burden to be able to try and step into whatever role we can. And it's not typically a law enforcement role, but we can make a referral. We can provide them with something so that someone can sort of help walk that process with them. And I feel strongly about that. I think that's in our best interest. I think it's our best humanity as people. And I think that that's one of the things that we're called to do, so that we're not just sort of creating collateral damage. And there is a ton of collateral damage around this issue. I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides. I've already talked a little bit about our Guardian Angel operation. Our recovery strategy has to be as robust, because the victims of trafficking are the most vulnerable out there, and we want to make sure that we're interdicting them. That has created sort of an environment and a plan where over the past several years, we've been doing education in the community. We've talked to all the different car services, the taxi services, hotel environments, the communities, people that where anybody would potentially run into a trafficking victim. And so many of our partners are engaged quite regularly in sort of making sure that everyone is aware of what those red flags are. And I know that my co-presenter, Beth, will talk about that a little bit. The recovery plan is one of the real important aspects to our recovery plan, is that idea of having an embedded advocate that will be with us that can help deal with the particular needs. Once law enforcement makes contact with the person, whether they're determined to be a victim or not, generally speaking, is on the weight of the evidence that we see. And oftentimes that's because they make a disclosure. Well, what happens if they don't make a disclosure? That doesn't mean we just turn around, close the door, sorry we bothered you, and walk away. We need to provide them with some measure of services. And that's where our partnerships come in with people that actually provide services. There's a number of things that we're still working out. There's a lot of details. I feel very confident after last week and today's training that we're ready to go on this. This is something, as I said, that we've been doing every day. Guardian Angel has been a big success. I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the hard work that people have put into it. And frankly, I think that it is something that, as you see it starting to be replicated around the country, that Minnesota's done a lot of good work for people, even people that we don't know. I get emails frequently about, how did you guys stand that up? What program? We even had a software program built just to be able to target how we need to do these operations. And so there's a lot of good work that's gone into this, and it certainly is built on partnerships.
I just wanted to make sure regulatory services and business licensing got some credit, because they are doing a lot of work to educate our businesses and to educate city employees who are out. Our housing inspectors are out and can see things. So that's what this slide is about. All right.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Council Chair and Council members. My name is Beth Holger Ambrose. I work for a nonprofit based in North Minneapolis called The Link. Congratulations. I'm so happy to see all of you in your seats. Really, we are. The youth were at The Link. We're also extremely excited when I kind of talked to them about who was elected. So we are actually a Viking-led organization. I happen to be a huge Vikings fan, so it's an honor to work for The Link in many ways, but we were founded by Jim Marshall and Oscar Reed 27 years ago. In addition to being Viking-led, we are also youth-led. So we have a traditional board of directors and 4 youth advisory boards made up of youth who are paid for their time that help us. They have lived experience of homelessness and sex trafficking and juvenile justice system involvement. They help to design all of our programs, our responses, help me to interview the right staff. They're constantly telling me what we need to do differently, better, and it's amazing. So just want to give credit to them. And we provide services like the JSC right down on the first floor in this building, juvenile justice alternative programs, housing, 7 housing programs for young people experiencing homelessness, as well as shelter, housing, and services for trafficked youth. But what I'm here to talk about today is our Super Bowl response. And I'm really happy to say that a year and a half ago, we kind of put together a very grassroots response. We brought together providers that were already doing work with sexually exploited youth or adults in the West Metro area and a few from the East Metro, and said, hey, what can you do for the 10 days of the Super Bowl, and what would it cost for you to do that in terms of front-end services? Because it is only 10 days, so we're focusing our response on street outreach, additional drop-in center time, and emergency shelter beds, and support for our great partners like Sergeant Schneider and law enforcement. And so it was very great, transparent process where the providers came together, provided budgets. Then we were able to, through the Women's Foundation and the NFL and other folks, kind of privately fundraise for that additional cost. It's grounded, of course, in what youth and adult survivors say, what they want, what works for them, and is also, I think I covered all this, but it's also very inclusive and respectful of all aspects of diversity. So open to female, male, transgender, any gender identity of victims and survivors, as well as racial background, economic status, and everything else you can think of. This is just a list. I won't necessarily go through this, but this is just to say I'm representing the services response for the Super Bowl, but it's definitely much, much more than just the link alone. And every day we work with a lot of other partners to do this work well, and I really appreciate all of the partners that are on this committee. It's a great group of people. I've had the pleasure of working with many of them for many years, but it's also intensified our relationship and our response in a very positive way. So again, we are going to be having additional shifts for street outreach out. I personally recruited people that are amazing street outreach workers that are going to be out there. We're calling ourselves Bold Outreach because after it got out that all the Super Bowl volunteers got to have this great swag, the outreach workers said to me, Beth, we at least need a hat. So we're calling our team Bold Outreach, and we will be out in North Minneapolis, downtown, South Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, some of the suburbs, between the hours of 11 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next morning. We are coordinated, so we're not duplicating any services, and we'll be targeting youth and adult victims and survivors of trafficking and helping them get connected in with services. For the Links Juvenile Supervision Center downstairs here, we're adding additional staff. And then that obviously is open to not just sex trafficked youth, but also any juvenile victim, juvenile person under the age of 18 that's done a low level or status offense or felony car theft. We also, like I said, have support for added staff support for victims that are referred by law enforcement. We want to make sure we can meet the needs of Sergeant Schneider and all of their teams. So we have some additional staffing available through all the service providers. Sorry, I'm trying to be fast because I know you've been through a lot today. And then also additional drop-in centers. So what's really great, again, we're building on what's already out there and just increasing the hours. So the minors, victims of trafficking, will be obviously sent to or referred to the Link's Juvenile Supervision Center. One of our great partners, YouthLink, who specializes in older youth, 18 to 24-year-olds, they're opening up their drop-in center 24 hours a day for 18 to 24-year-olds who have been exploited. Adults, what we're very excited about is we've kind of had a gap for adults in terms of drop-in centers and shelter. And so not that we have enough for youth either, but there's been a severe gap for adults. So Breaking Free is opening up 15 emergency shelter beds in St. Paul over on University, and they're also opening up a 24/7 drop-in center. Source, which is a partner that will be actually co-located at Hope Community Church right downtown here, is opening up a drop-in center from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., as well as 10 additional shelter beds for adult victims. And what I will say is Breaking Free and Source are open for female identified victims. The Link and YouthLink are open for any gender identity. Additional emergency shelter beds, we are at the Link currently working around the clock to get our beds up from 6 beds to 12 beds, which is great. So we'll have those up by the 27th through the 5th. Brittany's Place in St. Paul already has 12 beds, so those will be available as well. And then, like I already said, we'll have the wonderful additional 25 beds through Breaking Free and Source. Last but not least, the Super Bowl has brought this unprecedented awareness. I have never had so many media requests, training requests. It's for not just me, but our entire field. And what's wonderful is it's bringing an awareness to the issue that we would have never as nonprofits seen. And so we're really happy about that, and hopefully we'll be able to help a lot more youth. One of the other things that happened as a great thing was that, like I said, the Link is youth and adult led. So we have a survivor advisory committee made up of youth between the ages of 14 and 21 who have been sex trafficked that designed all of our programs for trafficked youth. And they said about a year and a half ago to me, Beth, we want to do something to help prevent our peers, our younger selves, from ever getting trafficked in the first place. What can we do? I said, well, let's try to write a grant to the Women's Foundation because they're always supportive of this work, which is wonderful. And so we did that, and we partnered with NAC. Those youth partnered with NAC to develop a prevention campaign that they wrote in language that speaks to them. And so I'm actually really happy, if it's okay to show you a 30-second video clip of this. And this got picked up by the NFL host committee and the NFL gods that be as one of their anti-trafficking prevention messages for the Super Bowl. So it is out in the community way wider than the Link could have ever gotten it, along with a reducing demand project campaign called Don't Buy It from Menace Peacemakers. So I'll show this and then I will be done.
I am not alone. I am worthy of respect. I am my own hero, and my body belongs to me. I am priceless.
There is a way out of sexual exploitation. For help, call or text 612-232-5428 or visit thelinkmn.org.
Okay, so with that, I just want to thank you all so much for your support of both youth and adults who have been exploited or have experienced trafficking. And we know that you have a million issues before you. So I appreciate so much the time to come here today and to speak before you. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All righty, thank you. So if there's any questions, please feel free to log into the speaker management. I did have a couple of questions, and I'm not quite sure if this would be for Mr. Snyder or our city attorney, but in general, where does the work live that you do in the organizational structure of MPD? Like, do you work for a specific precinct, or are you citywide? Is there a division that you lead that then serves the entire maybe city, but also region? Because it sounds like there's a lot of a very sophisticated network of sex trafficking, which would mean then we would need also a very sophisticated network to address it. So I'm just trying to figure out kind of where you live in the organizational structure of MPD, and then also what is the relationship that your division or department or effort has to the CRTs, to the, like, for example, in the 3rd Precinct, that would be Sergeant Severance, and I know he's been doing a lot of work to address the sex trafficking kind of like at the grassroots level of, like, the neighborhood streets and the commercial corridors.
Right.
So just trying to understand what the relationship is of your work, because you're very well known for leading this work. I mean, a lot of community members talk about you being a really good resource for them, and your success rate is definitely something that gets championed a lot in conversations around this. So just trying to understand more of the work as it connects to the other precincts and the CRTs, and then also just what is it that you expect will be the impact of the influx of all these folks coming in with a higher demand into the commercial corridors like West Broadway, Franklin Avenue, Cedar Riverside, East Lake Street. Do we foresee that everything will kind of stay here in the downtown hotels, or are we thinking that there's going to be just more activity in general all over the city around, women working the streets and pimps kind of, hanging out there, pushing folks out into doing things?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you for those questions. So first of all, organizationally, I have been assigned to several different units since I started doing human trafficking work. Most recently, I'm embedded in the sex trafficking unit, sex crimes unit, and running the human trafficking team. Last year, the BCA, in partnership with ourselves and with St. Paul PD and with Homeland Security Investigations, tried to put together a task force to try and work these cases more collectively. And we really had an ad hoc task force that existed before that. And that's part of that I hate to keep going back to Guardian Angel, but frankly, that's really how we built it, was through spending time in rooms with people, and you get to know people, you get to know how they think, you get to know how they work. We can, tweak those relationships a little bit. So to answer your question directly, right now, human trafficking is underneath the sex crimes unit under the Special Crimes Investigation Division. Oh boy, I apologize. I'm forgetting your second question.
The CRTs.
The CRT, yeah. So thank you for that question. That's a really good one, Madam Chair, too. So I've always looked at the CRT teams as a real potential resource for us. They don't answer obviously to me. They answer to the administration and the inspectors in the precincts, and so we have a lot of communication with them when we start working street level trafficking cases. I think that's an area of need for us in this city, to be perfectly straight with you. I think that I have every bit of confidence in the way that our CERT teams and stuff like that go out, and their professionalism and things like that. But I feel like there are opportunities there where we could really benefit from a closer relationship. Part of the issue is that our unit has been 2 people for a really long time. And so that's what we get right now with trafficking, with the Super Bowl coming up. We're getting about 6 new referrals a day. And those are all things that we have to sort of triage and figure out. And so I would love to be out in the precincts dealing with that street level trafficking. And that's sort of anchored in this idea that for a lot of victims of trafficking, there's a real crossover between the internet and that physical environment, whether it's Lake Street, Broadway, Lyndale, whatever it is. There's a lot of crossover there. We've made a lot of recoveries in those environments, but there's a real opportunity and a need for more communication and more close work there together with them. And then finally, you asked about
the impact on commercial corridors. Is it all going to be in downtown, in the hotels, or how do we anticipate this activity impacting the entire city? What does it look like?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's a great question too. Thank you for these. And actually, we addressed that question today in our training. And part of what I had to tell our whole team was we don't really know what exactly to expect. We do expect a lot of hotel-based trafficking in this area. About 90% of the trafficking that happens off the internet happens in hotels. There are some that doesn't, but most of what happens, and we expect the internet to be the big sort of venue where a lot of this stuff, where a lot of these relationships are going to start. There are going to be some real problems for people that are coming in from out of town that wasn't the same in Houston. For example, it could potentially be 30 below zero here in Minnesota. And so that outdoor air market is potentially going to be very different. I have been working closely with Breaking Free, with Pride, with people, with YouthLink, people that do street outreach and sort of trying to head that off and come up with a strategy of how we're going to deal with that. We have multiple teams that are trained and prepared and have worked in those environments before. So we're going to continue to sort of measure the activity there and be where we need to be. If I were venturing a guess, I would say that most of what will happen in downtown hotels will be what we call out calls. What that means that victims will be brought to the hotels. And so that's part of why we've been building this relationship with the hospitality industry, because that's actually quite easy to detect, as opposed to people where they're in the hotel room and then buyers are coming to them. That can be a lot more difficult to detect. And so that's what we expect in Minneapolis. But that also is the whole ring suburbs, or all their hotels are pretty much filled up at this point too. I dealt with a case from Eau Claire yesterday. They've got a trafficking conspiracy that showed up 2 days ago in Eau Claire. And so that's specifically for the Super Bowl. That seems like a long drive, doesn't it? Well, when you can't get a hotel any closer than that, that's part of why they're there. So.
Thank you. We have a question from Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all so much for your work. My question's for you, Sergeant. So we've talked a lot about victims who have been exploited and trafficked. In my work of working with young folks and young adults for a lot of years, I've definitely come across cases of young adults who are like, this is my side hustle, right? Like, this is how I make money because that's the path that I have. So I wonder how sex workers then fit into this particular framework of victimized folks who have been trafficked.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for that question. I think we could talk for hours on that because it connects very closely into the work when I was in grad school, addressing issues of sex work and commercial sex and things like that. So I have a lot of opinions about that, but I'm not going to share them here. I think what we see, there are questions that I am not fit to answer about people's right to work in commerce that they choose. Frankly, what I will lean back on, I've probably interviewed maybe 2,000 people that have been involved in some form of commercial sex. And I can count on one hand the number who thought it was a good thing. And so I keep going back to that sort of experience. That doesn't diminish everybody's right to have their own opinions. So I'm really looking at that. I'm really looking at that criminal aspect under 609, 322, and 324 to sort of direct where we go. And I feel strongly that when people get to a point where, and I think many people do, where they start out doing something they feel is not necessarily going to be exploitative, and it leads there, I want to make sure that we're a resource, that Beth's team is a resource, that they're there when that day comes. The average number of recoveries nationally for somebody from the first time they recovered till they actually get out of the life is 7. That's a shocking number of recoveries, but that tells us something about what we're really doing. That's why I don't use the word rescue. We're not rescuing people. We're planting seeds that when it's time for them to get out, they're going to know who they can go to and where they can get protection. I hope I answered your question, sir.
Councilmember Ellison.
This, and then also as someone who spent years working at Avenues for Homeless Youth and really appreciate the work around addressing homelessness and some of the exploitation that can happen around, especially youth homelessness. And so I know often people in my position will have to say, well, I'm open to ideas around how we solve issues like this, but I just want to let you know that I'm not just only open to ideas, but I want to really be a genuine collaborator in topics like this. So thank you all for the work that you're doing.
All right, so I don't see any more questions in the speaker management system, and I know you all are very busy and have spent a lot of time here with us today, so thank you. We will follow up with you on this very important topic, I'm sure, in the near future, in the months that come, and as we talk about the budget as well. So thank you, everyone, and with that, we do then just have a motion to approve and receive and file the presentation on commercial sexual exploitation as related to the Super Bowl activities. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And without further business on the agenda, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.